Okay. Yeah. That is 23p a month, is that it? Right. To like something on Facebook, I'm not sure. Designs. I've been deluging. I've been deluging pictures of various things like that. So I'll have to get the background as we get before. Yeah, basically. If you want social media, so I can send you directions. Photoshop to put that together. Where's your other half doing all this then, David? What?
You guys can be heard and I can be heard. So welcome to the Superkick Mania Pro Wrestling Podcast. My name is David Postansky and I am once again joined by Soggy Man himself, Sam the Lamb. He's going to kill me for saying that. Samuel George, how you doing?
Well, I prefer the Quiet Riot, but I'll take whatever nickname I'm given.
Oh yeah, I forgot that one. We were just discussing nicknames. I think we should all have like Sam's. You're the only one that's got like a George out of this with like a nickname. So we need to come up with some more. Okay, but from one Dave to another, he is DeGreeno. It is Dave Green.
It is.
Dave, every time I say DeGreeno, you always sort of cringe like you don't like it. Yeah, it's literally your Twitter handle.
Yeah, it's a Twitter handle. It's a name I came out with ages ago. It was like when Yahoo chat rooms were a thing, and just like, DA Green is all taken. It's my middle name starts with an A, so it's always DA Green. And it's like, I can't bother with a number. I don't want to be DA Green like 279 or however many else there are out there. So I just put an O at the end of it. It's sort of I like I don't mind seeing it. Every time I hear it, I'm like, this sounds weird, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a nickname or anything. But
well, okay, so if we've got Sog and we have Dag, so, you know, we've got some things there. Like so I'm David Riley Postansky, so it's Derp. I'm Derp. Or Drip. Drip.
Drip without the I.
Drop, Drip. I don't want to be a Drip. Okay.
Oh, Dag and Drip.
Drip. Sog. So, yeah, I am Drip, and now you are Soggy. I like it. Okay, so this is actually about professional wrestling. And speaking of soggy drips and dags, we're going to be talking about the worst gimmicks of all time in professional wrestling history. So if anyone is out there, feel free to comment in the chat. I will see if we've got any comments coming through at various stages. And we do. Mark Hobbs says hi. Hello, Mark. Are you a wrestling fan? Or have you just discovered this? What is...
Oh, hi, Mark.
Oh, hi, Mark.
What are your names, Mark? We can do something with yours as well.
Yeah, what's your middle name? Anyway, so we will talk about some of the worst gimmicks. You can see behind me I have the Repo Man. That is not the worst gimmick of all time, believe it or not. But there are lots and lots of bad gimmicks out there. Before we dive into individuals and go around presenting some examples as we try to uncover who is the worst wrestling gimmick of all time, what do we think makes a good or bad gimmick?
For me, I think some element of like believability. I feel like an audience has to buy into it, and so if it is someone who just comes in as a comedy act to make people laugh and lose every time they get into the ring, then I think that kills any enthusiasm you can have about them. Because at the end of the day, with wrestling, for me, I think it should be about competition as well as characters. So if you don't feel like there is any competition, and it kind of loses a lot of steam for me.
Absolutely. How about yourself, Dave? What makes a good... Well, we'll start with a good gimmick. What makes a good gimmick?
I think depending, as you say, on the believability factor of it and such like, even if there's a character that isn't like necessarily 100% believable, I think the person that is doing that gimmick has got to have some sort of level of commitment to it as well. So if there's someone who's not committing to their character whatsoever and is sort of just going through the tropes and trying to get through it as best they can, then that can always be a telltale sign that they are not going to do well. You know, if you think about my character, I'm going to give you a character where you're going to be an undead guy, you're going to be practically a zombie, you're going to be a guy who could rise up and come out of coffins and things like that, and you don't feel any pain, you know, and yet that character has been going since 1990. So
I thought you meant the ECW zombie.
Like not the ECW zombie. No, that's necessarily him. Forgot about him. Should be on the list. But
I'm finding a photo.
I mean, a character like the Undertaker, writing down paper, it sounds awful, but because he committed to it and went with the times, changed over the time with it, it ended up making it work. So if the individual is talented enough and committed enough, then they can make pretty much just about anything work.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, what makes a good gimmick? I completely agree with what's been said. Believability, commitment to the character. I quite like it when you get the characters that are somewhat based on reality. I do like some of the bigger characters that we've had over the years, but if there's a wrestler who is like, where there's like their nickname is just literally like a nickname, so you could believe someone is known as their real name might be Davy Boy Smith, which in itself is kind of like a fun but true life story as a real name, but he's known as the British Bulldog. He doesn't come out and claim to be a bulldog, but that just kind of represents who he is, and it's a cool name. If you get someone who is like the Hitman, Bret Hart. Like, Hitman was obviously, I forget the name of the boxer, other than the nickname was the Hitman, but there was, who is it?
Ricky Hatton, I think.
Quite possibly. I think there was one before that, though. I think Bret Hart took it from someone, and Ricky Hatton took it from someone else. Took it from Bret Hart or the previous boxer as well. But in cases like that, he doesn't come out with like a sniper rifle as the Hitman. And stuff like that, you know, works well. Stone Cold Steve Austin. What does that even mean? It just kind of suggests his personality, that he's Stone Cold Killer. But then you have ones who are obvious. And usually these are profession-based gimmicks, like the Repo Man behind me. He's called the Repo Man, and he's dressed like a cat burglar. And for some reason he's got a hook, which I can't remember. It was on a rope, wasn't it?
Tow rope, yeah.
Oh, tow rope. So he's going to tow your car away. And obviously that's not what he really does. Obviously that's not what he does when he's not in the wrestling ring, in the arena. And it's, for me, stuff like that doesn't work so much. But then, like you say, there's The Undertaker. The Undertaker, where you can have this big over-the-top character, and there's a lot of mystique around it, and you can even, like, I could have, with The Undertaker, done without a lot of the pyrotechnics and his being buried or put in a coffin and then disappearing from it, and I think the character still works. But because he's so good and so committed to it, you know, certainly you can forgive all of that, and as a wrestling fan, you can just have fun with the fact that there's this unique guy who's really kick-ass, who can do some magic tricks as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think going back to The Undertaker as well, it's one of these things where if someone like Gilbert was given the gimmick of The Undertaker, equally it wouldn't work, because, you know, The Undertaker is one of those ones, you kind of have to believe him as being this person who could come back from the dead. And being that Mark Calloway, as his real name is, such a big guy, I think that adds to some of it as well. I think the character does have to fit the actual individual it is given to as well, which can be a bit of a difficult balancing act.
Well, exactly. I think they got very lucky. Well, not lucky. It was a perfect storm with The Undertaker, because obviously he had been in WCW, Mean Mark Callis, and they got the guy who was unnaturally pale. You know, it has to be said, he's very pale. His face is very serious. You know, he's very tall, very like straight. He's not like the bulkiest guy. You put him in a suit, he does have the appearance of like a ginormous, but like an Undertaker. And then he could, it turns out, roll his eyes into the back of his head. You know, he could do the Michael Myers just straight sit up. You know, the commitment to it is extraordinary.
Yeah, I'd agree with a lot of that.
With Undertaker obviously being, as I say, on paper, not that great, but obviously the guy behind you, the ECW Zombie, that was wasn't that just like a weekly thing of like ECW when they started on Sci-Fi? They were just bringing out guys as these sort of weird sci-fi genre sort of nerd gimmicks, and where the Sandman was just beating them down, wasn't it? And but that was the first wrestler to come out on the new ECW. TV, and it was like, what are you guys thinking?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Did they bring out anything more? Did it happen any future weeks? They didn't bring out an alien or something, because I think, if memory serves, the Sci-Fi Channel said, we don't want you to beat up an alien. That's what we're all about.
Yeah, possibly. I know they brought out, they had a guy in the front row that was one that had Nacho Libre, and then the next week they had a minister or something like that, or someone pretending to be a minister. Each week it was just an excuse to bring Sandman out so he could cane somebody.
Yeah.
Each week, and of course, but there was one of the sci-fi gimmicks in ECW did stick. Kevin Thorne, the vampire guy.
Yeah.
Sort of outside there for ages and just showing his fangs, and then suddenly he was a wrestler.
Yes, Kevin Thorne. had he been there previously? Was he Mordecai? Or is that someone
He was
else?
Mordecai, yeah.
Yeah.
I
So-
sort of missed out on Mordecai. I've sort of seen bits of him since then, but I wasn't. It's weird. It was a bad gimmick, but I didn't understand really why everyone hated it as much as people seem to. I wasn't because I wasn't watching regularly at this time, so I didn't see the promos into it and the big entrances and all this sort of stuff. I just sort of seemed to give up on him.
Yeah, and again, it may just be the difference between if you get someone like The Undertaker, who always was a good wrestler. And it's not that Kevin Thorne is like a bad wrestler, but he wasn't a spectacular wrestler. And when you have some of these watered down Undertaker-like gimmicks, if it's not like the greatest wrestler, because he's a much smaller guy, one of the things that made The Undertaker work so much is he's like this giant who can walk the top rope, who can fly over the top rope, who can, he can perfectly balance the slowness of The Undertaker with the explosive speed and stuff. And it worked. And when you then see someone else trying to do an Undertaker-like gimmick, Mordecai in particular, like bleach blonde, like white hair, and everything was white, and it was just like an occult gimmick. The Undertaker wasn't even really an occult gimmick. He was just a dead guy. Yeah. But I'm trying to think if any occult gimmicks have ever actually worked. What's the closest?
There's a thing that's on the network at the moment. I think there's like a little subsection they put up there called like the strange and weird characters of WWE. And there's a name popped up in there that I've not seen for years. There's a British wrestler that got signed to WWE around like 2007, 8 or something like that. A guy called Hayde Vanson, and he was like a guy that was quite prolific over here during the sort of like the Brit Rest sort of the FWA years and things like that. He'd been signed, went to the States and trained in FCW and all these other places. And they put up a vignette on SmackDown right in December, I think it was 2008. I think it was now, of him doing this promo. It was a bit of an obscure promo, but it was all about saying, "I've lived in the darkness. I can see in the dark, whatever. I can see in the dark, but you know what I mean." But I can see the darkness. I've lived in the darkness. It's a little bit like thingy from Batman. That sort of
Bane.
That sort of thing. Yeah, it's all like the Bane speech.
Born in the darkness.
Yeah, but this was like done, I think, before that came out, so it might have been a bit ahead of its time. But anyway, apparently they aired this vignette, and then apparently Vince McMahon didn't okay this or saw this vignette and went, "Who the hell is this guy?" And they looked into the plans for him, and he just cancelled the plans outright. And he was released like a few weeks later or something like that. This is over Christmas or something like that as well.
Okay,
but yeah, they literally broadcast one vignette of him. They had no plans for it whatsoever. It was going to lead to an Undertaker feud, but they just canned it immediately. So literally one vignette he lasted.
And what's his name?
Hayde Vanson. And the thing is, like, since then he's sort of like just put a kibosh on wrestling entirely. But it's a gimmick that we never really saw go into anything because they just decided, no, we're not going to do that now.
Wow.
Really
Wow, I don't remember that gimmick at all.
No, it wouldn't. It was literally 1 minute on SmackDown. That was it. But it is on the network under the strange characters. So I watched it the other day. It's not that bad at all, but I guess clearly they thought this guy is, like I said, is too small or not experienced enough to go straight to a Taker feud, all that sort of thing. But I think, people that Taker has had feuds over the years with is quite an interesting subcategory of gimmicks.
Yeah,
as it was anyway.
So they bring in all of the weirdos, like we've spoken about on a previous episode, just like with Hulk Hogan, where they'd bring in some strange person, some big guy, some monster to try and defeat Hulkamania. The same formula happened with The Undertaker, where they'd bring in, as we spoke about, I think last week, Giant Gonzalez to tackle... Oh, no, it was 2 weeks ago, I can't remember. To tackle The Undertaker, and then they'd have... eventually we got Kane, which is, the good example of the strange gimmick to tackle The Undertaker. Yeah. But who else have we had to fight The Undertaker over the years?
Well, Gonzalez, he deserves a little mention of himself anyway. That horrendous suit that Giant Gonzalez was brought out in when he came out. 8 feet tall, they would say he was. with the furry suit, the fur covering up his genitalia as well.
Now, was he meant to be like a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch, or was that meant to be like that he'd got no skin? Was that meant to be like the raw muscles?
I think so. I think it's supposed to be like a Bigfoot of some kind, but like I say, it's just a case of the guy, the character just not really being. He was just never able to do anything, was he? I'll take back in. It was he had his own problems, obviously, with health and his body sort of working against him in order to do anything sort of with any sort of mobility. And as I say, it was just one of those many unusual gimmicks where a manager has to like properly go there. I think he had Harvey Whippleman, didn't he? So many bad gimmick people that he had to manage over the years. I'm trying to think of other Undertaker characters he'd feuded with over the years. Do you remember any, Sam? I'm trying to think.
Well, I know more recent years, the Great Khali came in and attacked the Undertaker, and that built to a big feud at SummerSlam. But,
the Great Khali, otherwise known as Giant Gonzalez Mark II. Okay, so not necessarily in terms of gimmick, because I think Great Khali is a better gimmick than Giant Gonzalez. I think Great Khali, it's a name, but essentially he's just meant to be a guy, and they play the fact that just like he's from India, so they play up to that fact. And obviously we spoke about the terrible match type that the Great Khali brought with him to the WWE, which was the Punjabi prison match.
Oh yes.
But then with the Great Khali, and I stick to this thought, and I've said it before. When Great Khali won the world title, I was like, yeah, no, I believe it. If a guy that big, or if a guy like the Giant Gonzalez was like, well, I'm going to win the world title tonight, and I'm just going to decide to do it, I'll be like, well, he could do that. I believe it. So yes. When the Great Khali was world champion, it's like, I don't have a problem with that. The matches might not be the most enjoyable, but it seems wrong if a guy that big isn't a world champion. And then a Rey Mysterio, who he could literally crush with his thumb, can be a world champion. But yeah,
each other, didn't they? Rey Mysterio and the Great Khali.
They did. They definitely had pay-per-view main event. But yeah, I'm trying to think. So the Great Khali, they took him, and after a while they turned him face, and he became like the love guru or something like that.
Playboy.
The Punjabi Playboy.
And a dance.
Yeah. And they do the Punjabi Playboy Great Khali kiss cam, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Oh my god, I forgot all about that.
Okay, so let's talk about this gimmick. This aspect of WWE in particular. They had Andre the Giant, and for better or worse of anything that the legend of Andre the Giant, how much of it was responsible by WWE, how much predated WWE, but he came away from WWE fairly unscathed in his legacy, in his history, and everything else like that. Why is it that pretty much every single monster that the WWE has ever had since, they end up making into a joke character? Now, it doesn't mean that they don't put right their wrong at some point, but that everyone gets tainted or damaged somewhat along the way. Where the Big Show was like Shonan the Barbarian and the Showster and God knows whatever other things they did with him. Mark Henry was Sexual Chocolate, and we had. Now, when you look at someone like Viscera, who eventually they got the idea, a few years before he died, of, well, we're just going to call him Big Daddy V and something like that, which sounds like a silly name, but Big Daddy, like the British wrestler, it's not necessarily a bad name. Big Daddy, the British wrestler, had tons of respect. But Big Daddy V, or Viscera, was also King Mabel and Men on a Mission, and it was
the world's largest love machine.
Oh my god, did they actually sort of rehash Sexual Chocolate with him?
Yeah, definitely. Do you remember his finisher, which was basically to hump his opponent?
I do recall, I do.
He was trying to pull Lillian Garcia for ages, and then she wouldn't rejected him, so he turned heel.
What other monsters have they just given, okay, so there was something that they probably deserved a lot of mention on their own. Sam, if you remember the Oddities. Oh, this was Attitude Era. So
Oddities,
you'd have the Oddities, which was the most famous of which was... Well, they came out with the Insane Clown Posse, who are pretty famous. The rappers slash the ones that own Juggalo Championship Wrestling. And that's not me being offensive. That was actually the name of their promotion. Juggalo Championship Wrestling. Yeah. Okay, so WWF Oddities, but the most famous one amongst them was probably Golga, otherwise known as Earthquake, who was one of these examples of someone that would come out to try and defeat Hulkamania. And they brought him back in about 1998 as Golga, who was basically a man in a gimp mask. So if anyone out there has ever seen, what's the film, Pulp Fiction, and they say, bring in the gimp, that's basically what they turned Earthquake into.
But they also had in that mask, they had like lumps on different things to give the impression that he was like had like jagged horns and things like coming out of his head. That's why he had the mask on.
Gosh, I've forgotten that detail.
Yeah, well, if you ever watched the original Oddities promo, which is Cyrus or Jackal, as he'd been previously, we'll talk about later. He was he brought out that he was at the Parade of Human Oddities, and he brought these guys from. It's a horrific sentiment. It's really bad, but he brought out these guys that were these oddity guys that were on Howard Stern's show, like that, and talking to them. Luckily, it was pre-recorded because what they just said was indecipherable nonsense and just swearing and all this sort of stuff. But then he brought out. He already had Kurgan under his watch.
The
Kurgan,
Truth
the Interrogator.
Commission.
From the Truth Commission. So he had Kurgan the Interrogator, he had Golga, and also eventually gets the Giant Silver as well.
Which, I forget how tall Giant Silver was, but Kurgan is close to 7 feet himself.
There they are.
And then Giant Silver behind me, if you're watching the video version of this, just dwarfed Kurgan. And he was completely talentless. But a guy that size, if he walks into a room and says, I own this room, or I'm going to be champion, I'll be like, yes, sir, anytime you want, sir. You know, so it's crazy to me that WWE have this history. Like, what did they do with, I'm trying to think, Heidenreich, and I'm trying to think, Matt Morgan. Was there one of them that they gave like a lisp to or something?
They gave Matt Morgan the stuttering gimmick.
Stuttering, that's it.
They were stuttering for a while, and would do the whole thing of like, "Are you laughing at me? Am I stuttering?" or something like that. And everyone was like, "Oh,
yeah." And
no,
what's that
I'm
other
scared."
one that it wasn't my fault? Who's that?
Snitsky.
Gene Snitsky. Do you remember Gene Snitsky, Sam?
Vaguely, yeah. I remember one particular storyline that he had with Kane, where Kane was married to Lita.
Yep.
And then she was pregnant.
Yeah.
And then there was the whole thing where she got taken out in some sort of brawl and someone hit her, and then she had a miscarriage. That's all I really remember about Snitsky.
Well, it was Snitsky, and that's where the catchphrase, "It wasn't my fault," came from.
I should point out, I'm not laughing at the idea of a miscarriage. I'm pointing out that right now, everyone's watching why I'm laughing so much. I'm laughing because that whole thing was so bad. So Lita was pregnant with Kane's baby because Kane had a feud with Matt Hardy over Lita. And essentially, they married, forced marriage because of the match condition. Then assumedly forced a baby. That's a whole other kettle of fish we're not going to open. So essentially, this was a case of these guys being like a forced marriage, this thing that he doesn't want to be a part of. And suddenly they had the miscarriage bit, and suddenly Kane's like the doting father, and suddenly he's like the good guy in the whole situation. So, damn it, that's his baby, that's his marriage. And then later on, when Edge comes along, they bring the real life situation into the mix with Edge taking over the Kane role, as it were. And saying, "Oh, damn it, that's his wife, damn it," and all that sort of thing. And we've just forgotten the whole thing, not a year ago, with the whole forced marriage and things like that. It was such a weird time with Kane. That's a subject for another time. The life and trials of Kane. That's what we talk about.
Kane's had ups and downs. I'd say overall he's comes out because he's talented enough. He's had enough good stuff in his career, but. Yeah. Kane is an example where they did stupid stuff with him again, and another big guy, they did stupid stuff. Undertaker, you could say, even though there's been some questionable things, He's never had just like character assassination style gimmicks. But okay, so who else was there? Nathan Jones. And in fact, was it at WrestleMania they were going to have The Undertaker and Nathan Jones against Big Show and someone else, and they just decided that Nathan Jones wasn't good enough to wrestle at WrestleMania?
Yeah, essentially. They had it was going to be Nathan Jones and Taker against Albert and A-Train. Sorry, A-Train at the time.
Albert, there's another
Big
one.
Show.
Bad gimmicks.
Oh, he's got a list of them. There's so many wrestlers with a list of bad gimmicks.
So let's focus on Albert for a second. So obviously Albert was originally came in a tag team with Test, and it was Test and Albert managed by Trish Stratus, and this may have even been the introduction of Trish Stratus, and it was basically that he liked piercings, and he was Prince Albert, which is the common name for a piercing through your ding dong, through your ding dong bell.
Oh, the ding dongs.
Oh my god, the ding dongs.
Yeah, anyway.
And so where did he go from there? Is there something else, or did he then become...
He went everywhere. So he started off as Prince Albert. He actually came in with Droz originally. And then he went
you're right then, you're right.
Then he did a little thing with the Boss Man, then went with Test, and they did the split up with those two. Then became A-Train after he did a little team with Scotty Too Hotty for a little while. There's so much. So other than that, the thing with Test. Then he went on with X Factor. That was it. He did X Factor with X Pac and Just Incredible.
Yeah, but that wasn't so bad. I'm just thinking the next thing that jumps to my head is they brought him back after he got fired or he left. I think he got fired. He went and had a career resurgence in Japan. So they brought him back as Lord Tensai.
Yeah.
Lord Tensai to feud with John Cena. And by the time that they actually got him to the pay-per-view main event, it was so clear that they'd given up on him. Like within the space of like 1 month of we're going to build him up to face John Cena, to John Cena not even really having that much bother with him, if memory serves.
Yeah, I remember when Tensai came in, because he came in and like it was almost like they were trying to create like this mystique character with him. He came out with this huge long robe. He had like a sidekick who came out and helped him like derobe basically.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like very obviously Japanese style. He came out and it looked really cool. And then he was in the ring, took off this robe, and straight away, first off, you think, oh, that's Albert from years ago.
Yeah.
Secondly, you see this, without wanting to show any disrespect, he was a bigger guy and not in a sort of a typically muscular sense. So it wasn't like he had a big six-pack or anything. He hung over his Speedos.
Yeah.
But he would still try and do like all of this Japanese style, like all these technical, calculated movements. And then obviously, as you say, with the John Cena feud, he then went to nothing. He had loads of tattoos, which during the match, like he had a series of them going down his face, which during the match would rub off. And then after that, they sent him to Tons of Funk with Brodus Clay.
I'd forgotten this. Yes, the Funk.
Sweet Tea.
Sweet Tea.
Yeah,
and he's an example of someone you could just see how uncomfortable he was on his face.
Yeah.
You could see that he wasn't like enjoying it when he's meant to be Sweet Tea. And
I don't know. I kind of disagree with that. I think he is, because that's why he's still there. He's like a head trainer of NXT, isn't he? One of the head trainers there, and so I never got the impression he was ever out there. You just see visibly with Tons of Funk at least. I think he was quite enjoying himself with that one. I think Tensai was a bit more difficult to do, but I got the impression that Brodus Clay was the one who was really not wanting to do the dancing and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But Tensai, I think Albert's like he's had so many like giving things over the years that he's quite. I was always more professional. Seemed more professional than Brodus today.
How much power does a wrestler have in WWE? So say you're someone like Albert, who he hard hitting. When he went to Japan, that's why they brought him back to WWE, because he was a monster. He could just smash people, and that's what you expect from a monster. But how much power does someone have where they're coming into WWE and they look at him and they say, okay, so we want you to be named after a piercing on a penis. And also, the other thing that we think works for you is you've got a hairy back, don't shave it. You know, at what stage is this wrestler just going like, well, my career's over before it started. I'm going to main event WrestleMania because everyone out there is going to get gimmick penis piercings and not shave their back to model themselves after me. Never mind Stone Cold or The Rock. You know, it's just like they must know that these things aren't going to work.
Yeah, but they all want a job, don't they? So if they dare like cross the boss and decide that they don't want to do it, they can always say, well, you know, there's a guy that's been waiting for an opportunity as well. He'll take it.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess so.
I wanted to bring up one guy you mentioned a moment ago that we didn't talk about. Just as you mentioned his name, and I did immediately get a flashback of a certain image, which I'm going to bring up right about now.
Oh, Heidenreich. Oh my God. So he was the... Yeah, do you want to explain this?
I don't know if I can. Well, that's a bit... Oh, I don't like that. I don't like my position there.
You can become Michael Cole.
Yeah, exactly. So this was the interesting time. So Heidenreich being brought in again as another person to try and avenge someone against the Undertaker. Was it Heyman, I think, brought him in?
Could have been.
And and then he turned into this sort of poetry reciter. And this is what he was leading on to do, instead of not doing this whole thing of like this weird little scene with Michael Cole turn into like a poetry reading. He turned into like a poet.
Yeah, but do you remember this actual scene? It was that it had very like sexual overtones, where it was like, "Oh, Michael Cole, there's something I wanted to do, and I've been waiting to do it." And he's like leaning into him, and Michael Cole's there, and suddenly into the shot, he's just like, "I've got a poem like this," and then he reads in this poem, and it's like, who was this for? Who did they think this is going to be entertaining? That what message was this giving? This swerve that he wasn't some sexual predator after Michael Cole.
Seems to be a lot of the time that with these sort of things, it's like almost like a rib on the guy that's on the receiving end of it, or maybe he didn't actually wasn't told what was going to happen. It was just like, okay, so we're just going to do this. He's going to take you away from the ringside and take you backstage. Just go with it.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to quickly mention, we've got a comment come through. I don't understand it. It might just be a spammy comment, but, you know, okay. We'll give it its dues and see if it's...
It's not a flag, is it?
It's not a flag. It's not a Turkish flag. But it says, "The lemons must flow," and it's from Gloomtube on D Live.
Lemons must flow. The lemons must flow.
Okay, you guys work that out. Bring up the next gimmick. I can just hear, like, an alarm in my house. I'm going to check what it is.
You go sort that out. All right. Well, should we talk about probably the most famous bad gimmick of all time? A certain man by the name of the Shockmaster.
Yes, I was watching a little bit on the WWE Network earlier. You mentioned about the Legends of Wrestling episode to watch. I was watching that, and they're talking about all the Shockmaster stuff. I looked him up, and I was quite surprised to find that he was actually a part of quite a popular tag team. It was Typhoon, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was Typhoon. He was Tugboat. Real name Fred Ottman. Tugboat came in. Tugboat's like weird.
No, you can't have brought this up without me here, guys. I can't believe you did this.
No, we're just talking about the Shockmaster.
The Shockmaster. Because he is going to shock the world, because he is none other than the Shockmaster, and then crashes through the wall.
Yeah, so Sam was watching the Legends of Wrestling episode where Dusty Rhodes talks about what happened, because he's the one who booked it.
And you could hear the reactions as it happens, though. You hear, like, the British Bulldog going, "He fell on his ass! He fell on his ass!" Like this.
On his fucking ass.
Yeah.
Blair going, "Oh God!
Oh God! Oh no!" But then, kudos to them. You cut to a shot of Sid, and he looks so angry.
Yeah, he's brilliant. He's actually brilliant. He almost saves the segment, because he's just sitting there and just goes, "I don't know who you think you are, man."
Yeah.
Whatever it just says, and then you got Ole Anderson, who's doing the voice over the top, just starting to laugh into the microphone.
Now, here's the thing: WWE. WWE did actually reintroduce the character of the Shockmaster when they were trying to promote a WCW DVD they were trying to sell. They thought this was the best way to do it. But the thing that hurts my heart is that the WWE have never thought to think... Because they've released an action figure of the Shockmaster. Why have they not just brought the Shockmaster in? Or just had something that just celebrates this amazing incident happen? Where the Shockmaster's pyro goes off and he always, for his entrance, just falls through and has to put his helmet back on. They should do that. It should be on every show. It would never get old.
Didn't the Shockmaster toy get released upside down?
Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
That's brilliant.
I love it. I'd love to get
it. Came up, but they were never able to do it anyway because they came out with it was a glittery stormtrooper helmet.
Yeah.
There we go. So it's like they would have been sued by George Lucas right away had this gone any further.
So it was literally covered in spray paint with glycerin.
Yeah.
So blatant. But despite all the tripping over and everything like that, so look at it. Even if he burst through that wall and had gone exactly according to plan, no one was going to take that seriously.
And he didn't.
He was going to go into a War Games match with that on his head.
In this big vest coat thing.
Yeah, massive vest coat. And what did they turn him into? They turned the Shockmaster into just like a clumsy builder in the end.
They did.
So just a denim waistcoat, hard hat, and like that. He came in one of the weirder War Games matches because he comes in as the last entrant and pretty much just beats everybody in like 3 minutes. He puts a bear hug on Booker T, and then it's sort of over. It's weird. So the initial push for him was quite big, but then he just became a clumsy big man, and yeah, it was a bit unfortunate for poor old Fred.
Yeah, like obviously. No, go ahead, Sam.
Did he want top of the Stormtrooper helmet?
No, he ditched all this. They ditched the helmet, ditched the big cape fur coat thing, and he was just like a typical builder outfit.
Right.
Yeah.
If you ever see a Shockmaster in action, you won't see this. It's Typhoon in denim and a builder's hat.
Yeah, that's it exactly.
Weird.
It's very odd, but the entrance is incredible. What about some of the other ones that are quite the famous ones? I think the Gobbledygooker is one of the more famous as well.
Yeah, I was looking this one up earlier as well because there was another one that came up on there.
There he is. There he is.
So there's the Shockmaster basically as the builder from like Die Hard, who needs to switch off the
He reminds me of the janitor from Friends. You know, the one who
that's even better. Yeah, the one that Joey has to dance with. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That sort of thing.
But yeah, the Gobbledygooker was one I was looking up earlier because I saw him again on the Legends of Wrestling episode, and it just the whole thing looked so odd and uncomfortable when I saw like how they actually brought him in. They had this oversized egg that even as Gene Okerlund was introducing it was making jokes about. Then this person in a chicken costume jumps out and just goes crazy and then goes gobble 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 gobble, and even Gene Okerlund's going, "Is that all you can say? Gobble 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 gobble." But I was looking this up. The guy who played the character was like Eddie Guerrero's brother or something, wasn't it?
Hector Guerrero.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy the fact that these gimmicks are portrayed by people who are actually quite well known.
And it's amazing because you can hear audible boos in the background. People are not liking this whatsoever. And you've got poor old Roddy Piper and Gorilla Monsoon on commentary saying, "Oh, I love it! This is amazing! Oh, Gobbledygooker, a big hit here at Survivor Series." And it's like, no, he's not.
Yeah.
Again, it's another one that was never going to go anywhere. And of course, the big rumor is that originally Undertaker was going to come out of this egg. It's going to be the Eggman, something like that. And they had to change it and things like that to change their minds, thankfully, and go to the Undertaker thing. But
yeah,
and they had this come out. I mean, it was Thanksgiving. It was an egg. It was a turkey.
Okay, so but is the idea this was never meant to be a long-term thing? I just remember it it was one and done until I think they brought it back in the gimmick battle royal maybe at WrestleMania.
It might have been wanting to be like a
2000
mascot or something like that. No idea. It was maybe.
No, yeah, because Gene Okerlund was there, and this thing is going to hatch. It came out. It danced with Gene Okerlund. I don't think it was ever seen again, was it? Until like the gimmick battle.
Not on pay-per-view, no. No, not in the ring. No, that's the WrestleMania 17 gimmick Battle Royal.
17. There you go.
One of the most fun matches ever. It's great.
Yeah. My God, the participants of the gimmick battle royal may actually just sum up some of these gimmicks that we're trying to think of.
That's a huge list of stuff there. Who else was on my list near the top? Oh, well, we talked about him a little bit last week because he was on the watch along. The many gimmicks of Terry Taylor.
Yeah.
So we saw him as most famously the Red Rooster.
Yeah. So who else?
Turkey to a rooster.
So he was the Red Rooster. He was the tailor-made man. What else was he?
He was a tailor-made man. He came back to WWF for a very small spell as terrific Terry Taylor.
Yeah.
He just had various sort of things where he just wasn't really. He's another one of those guys that wasn't necessarily trying to get into the character. He was obviously a very technically really good wrestler. He thought of as a really good hand. They say in that Legends of Wrestling one, when they talk about him, that he was a guy that just never committed to the characters he was given and things like that, and because he was embarrassed to be known as the Red Rooster and strutting around and all this sort of doing like the rooster strut and all that sort of stuff. Because I think the story goes that he was brought in by Bobby Heenan, and Bobby Heenan said he could make anybody, he could like manage anybody to stardom and things like that. So he took what he said was a nobody in Terry Taylor and called him the Red Rooster, because I think that's like a terminology for like someone who's green or something like that, or in sports or something like that. It's like they're called a Red Rooster because they're new to whatever they're doing or something. Eventually he was losing too much, so chucked him aside, and then Terry Taylor says, no, I'm going to make the Red Rooster thing bigger than you ever would be. And so then cut his hair, dyed it red in the middle, struck it up and everything like that, did the whole rooster struts and all that sort of stuff, and he's had the music, which started with the cockerel going, and he was always too embarrassed to do it. I think was the idea. And the idea was that it was between him and Kurt Hennig to become Mr. Perfect, apparently.
Wow.
So, Terry Taylor definitely missed out there then, didn't he?
Okay, so this brings up an interesting point though. So Mr. Perfect, if it wasn't someone as talented as Kurt Hennig, would have that worked, or could that easily be on the list? The Undertaker could so easily be on this list if someone else had done it. Who are the examples of people that have got questionable gimmicks on paper, but make it work? Or we'd never question that it's bad, but we could think, well, if it was someone else, this wouldn't work.
Well, to answer the first question, Mr. Perfect, no one else but Kurt Hennig could have done that, especially in his heyday, because he was just the ultimate guy to do that sort of thing.
Now, let's have a look at a couple of other people who have tried to do it, because obviously we've got Mr. Perfect's son, who they never attempted to give the Mr. Perfect gimmick to.
No.
Before that, in WCW, there was Meat from WWF, who was the son of Stan Stasiak, former world champion, Sean Stasiak.
That's it.
They brought him into WCW in the storyline where they were basically having one-for-one rip-offs of well-established stars, but with younger people, and they called him Perfection, Sean Stasiak, because they couldn't call him Mr. Perfect, but his music was basically a rip-off of Mr. Perfect, and it didn't work. There was nothing about him other than perhaps he's like posing aren't I perfect sort of thing, but there was nothing about it, the gimmick, which was similar to the idea that Mr. Perfect could do anything. And Mr. Perfect really lived the gimmicks in so many ways. I remember that they'd have the vignettes of Mr. Perfect, and he'd be playing basketball, and he'd throw the basketball over his shoulder, and it would land into the net. They'd have him like playing golf, and it's a hole in one. And the legend goes that they would spend all day trying to get these 5-second shots to show that he could do it. But he'd walk down the aisle, he'd always walk out with a little hand towel, he'd throw it over his shoulder, catch it in the other hand, and stuff like this that really gave the sense that, look at this, I'm perfect, everything I do goes right.
Chewing gum spit.
Yeah, all these kind of little tricks. Sells it.
Never missed.
Okay, but who else has got the gimmicks that, on paper, perhaps aren't going to be good, but they made them work?
Trying to think. I I mean, thankfully, Stone Cold Steve Austin never had to like worry about that list of names he got given, because he was trying to like do the whole Cold thing, and the writers and whatnot gave him a list of names like Baron von Ruthless and Chili McFreeze.
Oh my god!
All this sort of thing, and something like that. Ice Dagger.
Do you know what? If I was going to become a wrestler now, I think I'd want to just call myself Chili McFreeze. I mean, why not?
I mean, it's almost like the sort of like the parody gimmicks and things like that. I mean, we mentioned him very briefly a moment ago, but what about Gilbert? That's a character that really shouldn't have like done anything. It should have been one and done, like you're saying. It probably was originally going to be one and done, but the crowd loved him so much, they just kept going on with him.
Are you sure they loved him so much?
Oh, I think so. They're laughing with him.
I thought that, so he was the WWF Light Heavyweight Champion in an era where they had completely given up on the belt. And my recollection of it was that they weren't doing anything with this championship. It would mimic Goldberg more, because Goldberg was WCW World Champion. If Goldberg came out with this belt, they'd have the sparklers. But I don't know how long. Like, I think he was the WWF Light Heavyweight Champion until they just decided, oh, we're going to bring it back, or they just phased it out, and it didn't exist for years.
Yeah, he sort of came off like a one-off thing, and then they had Esse Rios beat him for it on a random episode of something, a Heat or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this was originally part of the Job Squad. Al Snow's little group towards the end of '98 and '99. They had him upset Christian, I believe, of all people, for the belt. And they just kept him on him for ages so they could do the Goldberg parody. But I don't know. Parody gimmicks, I think, are always quite good fun anyway, because they could sort of get away with it. It wasn't, and even though this was done sort of like to mock Goldberg almost, it's sort of like I don't know. Just everyone sort of had a begrudging sort of liking for him when trying to come out and be like, "Oh God, here we go."
Well, see, the interesting thing is
he would never win. He would never win at all. He'd always be the opposite of Goldberg, just lose in a minute.
Yeah, so the interesting thing is his real name is Dwayne Gill. So Gilberg, it's something where he can, because he had to shave his head to become Gilberg. He could just keep this going, and it's like for him as a wrestler going forward, he could turn up on the Indies and be Gilberg and be a parody of Goldberg, and that's more than what he'd ever achieved in his own right as Dwayne Gill. But okay, so what are there any other parody gimmicks that actually lasted?
Well, Charlie Haas had one for a while where he parodied whoever his opponent was.
I forget this.
Oh yeah, that impersonator thing, didn't he? That's right.
So,
yes.
For example, he went up against the Great Khali, and he was known as the Great Charlie.
Came out as Bret the Hitman Haas once.
Wow.
I think this is all to do with his lack of personality. Again, another rumour about his lack of personality. He's just making him do all this. He did a really good impression of JBL once. That was quite a fun one. I think he actually beat JBL as JBL. I think that's was bizarre. Again, it's just one of, I don't know, like a punishment gimmick as such.
I just looked him up, and apparently there was at least one time where he mimicked the Glamazon. So.
Yep.
Oh yes, he did.
Somehow I've completely forgotten this existed.
Oh, what about the BWO? They lasted a while.
Okay, so that's a brilliant example of a parody gimmick that lasted. Still to this day, because you've got the Blue Meanie, then you had Big Stevie Cool, which was Stevie Richards, and then you had Mike Hollywood Nova. So
that's right.
Yeah.
There's a few others that came in and out, but it's mainly those three. But yeah, they just lasted for a long time. Sorry, Sam, go on.
I was moving on from BWO, so if you've got any more about that, then
no, not much.
I was going to say Damien Mizdow lasted quite a while.
Yeah.
Probably longer than he should have done.
Yeah, and that, in a sense, that's a gimmick that he made work, which shouldn't have worked, and then he was rewarded with making it work by being buried. They took it away from him, and it's like, whoa, hang on, that's working, we don't want you to work. Yeah. And they buried him some more until it didn't work, and then he was released. But have you seen? So Aaron Stevens is his real name. Have you seen him on NWA?
I've not been watching him.
Oh my god, it's got better. Oh my god, it's going to bring me to a particular gimmick, in fact, because it's something that shouldn't work but does work. But in the NWA, Aaron Stevens came out, and he's been out of wrestling for a year or two, where he literally wasn't wrestling, but he'd done a bit of acting, and he came out. And NWA, they've got this thing going on where they're purposely retro. They'll have like vignettes and commercials which feel like they were made in the 1980s. Like the sound effects will be like old school, the visuals, the on-screen titles are old school. And it's got this charm to it, but there's also a side of it, it was like, you're doing it so much, it doesn't seem like it's parody, it feels like this is just what you can achieve. But with Aaron Stevens, he'd come out as like, I'm the great actor. Everyone, shush! Listen to me like this. You know, he'd go on. You've got to listen to me. Don't look at me when you talk to me. And he'd carry off as if he's this great actor, which to me completely didn't work because it seemed like it was a completely new gimmick. It wasn't just, well, I'm in Hollywood now, so therefore I'm a Hollywood actor and I'm now better than what I was and better than you. It seemed like he was just trying to sell that he was a Hollywood actor, and they'd put out these trailers which were obviously fake, that didn't work whatsoever. However, they have evolved his gimmick, and I'm about to save and show you guys the picture of what they did with it. Because he got a tag team partner, or a sidekick, however you want to put it. If I can bring this up, I'm just going to grab another
Question mark.
The question mark, you know where I was going. So in NWA...
Well, I just heard of it, I've never seen it though.
It's both great and awful at the same time. They were hyping with these old school vignettes for weeks that we would see the question mark. Who is the question mark? It'd have like strange noise of animals that, you know, are extinct or whatever. They'd speak about Monrovia, where this guy comes from. Is this going to load? It doesn't look like it's loading. So I'm going to show you the question mark. And hopefully this one will load. There we go. So the NWA question mark would be a guy that would come out, and I forget who it is, Josephus. His name is Josephus, and he was in NWA, and he'd wrestled other places before it on the Indies. And he was fired or banished from NWA. And then clearly the storyline was going to be that the question mark is just Josephus or Josephus, I forget how it's pronounced. It's Josephus, and he's clearly pretending to be the question mark. Like Hulk Hogan came back, and he's not Hulk Hogan because Hulk Hogan's been fired. He's now Mr. America. And that was so obviously the storyline. But the audience, which you see behind there, the NWA audience, went bananas for the question mark, chanting for the question mark. And he would come out and he'd be, oh, oh. And his move is basically like, it might be like Umaga's thumb to the throat, but it's just like basically a single strike to like the throat, and it's the Mongrovian spike. And eventually and like such shame with lockdown and everything, we don't know where NWA was going with everything because they haven't continued their shows. Which is weird actually, just as a side note, because when you can see the audience there, the way they film NWA is literally that's the entire audience. They don't have a full arena, they've got about 200 people there. Of all of the shows that could have continued going, NWA was the closest to being completely normal circumstances, because for 3/4 of the arena, you didn't have audience anyway. But regardless. So Aaron Stevens would come out, and they decided that Aaron Stevens is now the pupil of the question mark, who is his sensei, who is teaching him Mongrovian karate. And every time he'd say, and now that I have learned Mongrovian karate, the question mark would come over to the microphone and go, karate! And the audience would join in and go ballistic with it. And it's an absolute example. Aaron Stevens' gimmick in NWA, to me, wasn't working, and it's better now with the question mark. But the question mark is the ultimate example of a gimmick that shouldn't work, but somehow does. It's the worst costume. The guy's out of shape. Clearly he has no skills in karate at all. His beard, because Josephus just has a big beard, just hangs out the bottom of the mask. It looks really poor. And yeah, Sorry, I've spoken for quite a while. You guys
That's
say
good.
hello.
I'm going to start watching more of it.
I do you know what? NWA is really fun.
Yeah,
NWA.
there's so much wrestling to watch out there. I just can't keep up with it.
Yeah.
I was going to say that I think Aaron Stevens sort of has I guess he had a list of gimmicks he's had and things like that. But I think he had an interesting run in TNA, especially towards the end of his run there, where he was Aaron Rex.
Ooh, I scarcely remember.
For some reason, he came in just a sort of just bog standard sort of like I'm Damien Sandow, but I'm not Damien Sandow, Aaron Rex. And then out of nowhere, he shaved his beard. He suddenly had Rockstar Spud by his side, and he was basically being Liberace.
Right.
He came out and had the rings and things like that. Was talking slightly more camp and all this sort of thing. And apparently, this is a character he pitched to WWE for years. And they always said, no, we don't want to do it, we don't want to do it. And when he finally did it in TNA, you could kind of tell why they didn't want to do it. It wasn't working. Very weird.
The thing is, if it's going to be like a camp gimmick, there's not many camp gimmicks that work. You look at, like, I think the Velveteen Dream works quite well, and that's sort of a semi-camp character. But it's not like a real full-on camp. It's kind of, it's the colours and the flamboyance, you could argue, are a bit camp. But actually, in the ring, he is as much of a goer as anyone else. You can see from how much muscle he has and some of the moves that he does that he isn't just like this camp boy. He is like a proper wrestler.
So who are examples of other camp gimmicks that I'm trying to think of? So
one that I would say worked because of the way, because it was the original and it sort of still worked, was obviously Adrian Street. I don't know if you've seen the documentaries on the network about him, but
doesn't Gorgeous George predate that though?
Pardon?
Gorgeous George?
He would predate Adrian Street, yeah, but I don't know if he was like camp as such. He was sort of the flamboyant stuff, whereas Adrian Street was properly sort of tapping into sort of like the sort of the homosexual fears and things like that of people and things like that. He'd go in there and would slap the opponent's bum and things like that, and like would kiss them full on the lips, then surprise them with the roll ups in order to win it and things like that, win the match and stuff like that. The whole sort of thing of imagine what I could do to you is sort of like his sort of famous phrase and things like that. So Adrian Street was sort of like a guy from like the Welsh coal mining villages and things like that. Came up with this uber camp, over flamboyant gimmick, which made him stand out from the crowd and he would inspire like these sort of characters like Goldust, for example. Another character I imagine Goldust was quite inspired a little bit by him as well. With the whole
now he was androgynous. Androgynous was the key word there, and the fun story with that is when Dustin Rhodes went to WWE and Vince McMahon, the legend goes, says, we want your character to be androgynous. Dustin Rhodes was pleased to have a job, and he's like, yep, certainly. And he came out the room, and he's like, I need to look up what the word androgynous means. So he didn't know what he was getting himself in for.
Another one is just had just tremendous success with Goldust, but not so much with other characters. And I want to bring up another one I've got on standby here when he went to TNA, and he became Black Rain.
I didn't mind that. I felt that out of all of the gimmicks he had, that one was the closest to working.
It's a character he's not fond of. He was going through a very tough time at the time. He was He was pretty out of shape. You can probably tell from that chin that he's got there. He wasn't in good shape. He was having a lot of problems with drugs and things like that. And anyone ever brings up Black Rain on Twitter to him, he blocks them straight away, or used to at least.
Wow.
And things like that. He really hated this character. He always said it's the darker side of Goldust. I've had Goldust, and now you see the even worse side of it. And he'd have a rat in the cage. The thing around his chain there is a cage, a rat cage. I think I can't remember what the rat's called. Misty or something like that. I think
could have been.
Yeah. And he also had tea with this fella.
Relic, which is killer spelled backwards. You know how we know that's the case? Because they said that every time they said his name on commentary. Didn't the K also come up on screen backwards, or am I remembering that wrong?
Yeah, I think so. But he also he used to be another guy from a former member of the FBI and the Mamalukes, Johnny Stamboli.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, Johnny the Ballslam.
But yeah, they were an interesting little monster team in TNA, which when I say interesting, I don't mean the good side of interesting. These two were.
Okay,
these
but
characters were not good.
Dustin Rhodes has also had another gimmick which really didn't work, and it didn't work to the point that it only came out once to mock it. And this is after he left WWF in about 99 perhaps, and went back to WCW. And I think the backstory of him leaving was that him and his wife, Terry Reynolds, Marlena, there you go, Marlena split up, and I think there was like a slightly good-natured side to this story, that it would be easier for him to get another job elsewhere in wrestling than for her to. So I think he was the one that stepped away, because obviously they'd got a child together and everything like this. So he went to WCW, and after doing Gold Dust, as we saw with Black Rain and everything else he does, he always ends up in paint. But he came. They had these vignettes, and he was called Seven. And the idea of it was going to be based on a film called Powder, which was about like a child molester or something like this. And this was the vignettes. They were doing creepy stuff in it. And if memory serves, he only came out once as this character. And basically he came out and was like, this is what creative have got for me. You know, they want me to do this. I'm the natural Dustin Rhodes. And this was a good segue from this, where they'd done these... but it was genuine. They were going to do this, and I think he literally floated or levitated down the aisle. Which I forget how they quite achieved it. Probably just on a wire. But yeah, he was Seven.
Fun. But yeah, so if everyone says, "Oh, maybe it was a shoot at the time," it's like, well, no, clearly it's not. It's just a way of getting him to be like Dustin Rhodes and like do this sort of feud where involving his dad and Jeff Jarrett and Flair and all this sort of other stuff. And yeah, like I say, it was but the vignettes were dead creepy. It's like, are they really going to do a pedo character? This is going to be very unusual.
Yeah, but I tell you what. So there's a couple of points from that. One, this was we mentioned Brodus Clay earlier, who they did a bunch of vignettes for. Like Brodus Clay is going to be this tough guy monster, and then they swerved us with him being the Funkasaurus. And in a similar sense, they had, even though I think it originally at one stage was the plan, Dustin Rhodes was going to come out as Seven, and then they swerved us by him dropping that gimmick as soon as he came out. But the other thing I'd say with Dustin Rhodes is that Gold Dust is his most successful gimmick ever, unquestionably. He had success in WCW in the early days, like we spoke about before, his tag team with Barry Windham against the Hollywood Blondes and so on and so forth. But when he has tried to be Dustin Rhodes, or basically anything else up until his debut in AEW, where people now, he comes out still with half face paint on, he's acknowledging, I'm still half Gold Dust, but I'm calling myself Dustin Rhodes, everyone knows I'm Dustin Rhodes anyway. Every single time he's been Dustin Rhodes, be it in TNA, be it in WCW in the late 90s, early noughties, whatever, it hasn't worked. The Dustin Rhodes personality gimmick didn't work in between him being pre-Gold Dust and up until him coming into AEW. Was there a time where the natural Dustin Rhodes had won over the crowd? It just seemed like you were Gold Dust taking away Gold Dust.
And that little very brief feud with Val Venus in WWF Attitude Era time where he was just Dustin Runnels, wasn't he? And then he was sort of like preaching, saying he is coming back, he's going to be coming back, and was doing all his things for. If you folks at home, if you're watching this, you might want to think about putting the children to bed, because what we're going to see is a lot of deplorable violence and all that sort of stuff he was doing. He denounced the oldest character, he like burnt it all in a big bin fire and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, then end up the one that was coming back was Gold Dust. So it ended up being a come around for that anyway, like you say. So definitely not. We mentioned him briefly earlier, John Tenter, Earthquake. He sort of another one who sort of couldn't get away from like the gimmicks. And not only was he Gold Dust when he went to WCW, they couldn't call him Earthquake, so they called him Avalanche. Yeah. And then the whole next one of the stables I wanted to mention later, which I might as well mention now, the Dungeon of Doom. A good contender for my worst gimmick of all time, in terms of the stable. Yeah.
But of course, WWF threatened to sue that he couldn't be Avalanche because clearly it was Earthquake, and so then he became the Shark.
And the absolute the dedication to the cause of all that stuff. He had his very famous tiger tattoo they had on his arm, and he changed it to a shark.
What?
Did you ever see it? Did you ever remember his earthquake? He had that tiger tattoo on one of his arms. When he became shark, he had it changed. The tattooist covered it over with a shark.
Wow.
No joke or a lie. I remember seeing it the first time and going, "What has he done to his arm?" So I was really confused.
He did it as a tattoo, so it was a permanent thing.
It was a tattoo. It was a tiger, and they changed it to a shark when he was shark. And that was very briefly for the Dungeon Doom thing anyway. So the Dungeon Doom, so Sam, if you've ever seen the Dungeon Doom, like the vignettes and the various things before they became like an in-ring faction, the beginnings of the formation of the Dungeon Doom is hilarious. You had Kevin Sullivan running out of the ring at an event where he lost a match, but you could hear someone saying, "Sullivan! Sullivan!" Only he could hear it, so he ran out of the arena. And then they would film him week on, week out, running in these woods, mountain areas, things like that, trying to find this voice of going, "Sullivan!" in the background. And eventually he was teleported to this cave, inside this huge cave. And there is like the mighty being, I can't remember what his actual name was. The actual guy was King Iakea, I believe is his name.
Prince Iakea, right?
Prince Iakae's dad.
Oh, amazing.
So the original Iakea. I can't remember what his name was, but he was kind of like in Return to Oz. He was like the rock, the noble who's in the rocks, things like that. He was sort of like done up like that, covered in dust, covered in like the sound of a big throne. And Sullivan, we must end Hulkamania. Another one, 12, end Hulkamania. Everything's to end Hulkamania. So he teleported Sullivan there and changed him into the Taskmaster, which was basically Kevin Sullivan with Go Faster stripes on his side. So Kevin Sullivan became that. Then they brought in King Haku, or Meng as he was known there. And so they kept him as Meng. They just had this giant sort of like pretty cool like tiger helmet thing that he would wear to the ring. So he sort of kept him as it were there. They brought in Kamala, Ugandan giant, kept him as Kamala, didn't change him or anything like that. For a very brief spell, Vader was part of the Dungeon Doom.
Wow.
Very, very briefly, only for like a few weeks, and they changed him to being on Hogan's side. They had who else did they have in there? Of course, they had Brutus Beefcake, the king of the many gimmicks.
Yeah, we'll get to him.
In this one, we'll get to him later as me. In this one, he was Zodiac, which I think we mentioned to you last week, which was entirely in black and white striped face paint, and his whole thing was go, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. That's all he did. So he was a Zodiac, and then they also brought in a guy by the name of the Giant. The Big Show, Paul White. Yeah, so he was the Giant. That was his debut thing, was the Giant, and the vignette where he debuts is one of the funniest things in wrestling history, where Hogan is teleported to the Dungeon Doom, to the cave, confronts Sullivan and everything like that. But he's looking around the surroundings going, "My God, where am I? There are no Hulkamaniacs here. What is this?" And sees a running vat of water which has got steam coming off of it. And he touches the water and goes, "Ah, it's not hot." And then has this dialogue with Sullivan. And then bursting out, knocks him down, knocks Hogan clean down, bursts through the wall, comes the Giant. And that's the debut. And also, but that's not the end of it, though. That's not the end of it, though, Sam. Many more characters will come from the Doom. Namely, the Yeti.
The Yeti! Okay, so this is a special character that needs talking about. Wasn't this actually where the Big Show won the WCW World Championship as well?
It was. Have we lost Sam?
Sam?
It's
no.
Frozen.
The Yeti has frozen Sam.
Oh, no.
Sam
ran away from the fear of the Yeti.
The Yeti, as pronounced by Tony Schiavone. So the Yeti was a mummy. So even though it was called the Yeti, which is a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch, the Yeti came out dressed all in bandages, and he looked like the mummy. And whilst the Big Show, the Giant, like bear hugs Hulk Hogan, the Yeti came the other side to join in this bear hug.
A double bear hug.
A double bear hug But this looks like they were both having their devious way with Hulk Hogan on live pay-per-view. He was just bouncing back and forwards, holding Hulk Hogan, thrusting into him.
Hamburg 1995.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
So, the Yeti...
And he debuted the Nitro before, right at the very, very end, by breaking out of a block of ice.
Yeah.
And the original idea was that this was going to be the return of El Gigante. Apparently, he was going to be the Yeti.
You're right, yeah.
But they ended up getting a guy, I can't remember his full name, but he ended up being Reese in Raven's Flock.
He did.
So
now, the interesting thing with the Yeti, if I remember correct, didn't they bring him back out basically as a ninja?
Yeah, so the Yeti couldn't carry on as wrestling in bandages, so it's Yeti in a mask, and then they just changed him for some reason to Super Giant Ninja.
Yeah.
He's in the World War III match that year as the Super Giant Ninja for some reason. Why they thought that was a good name, I don't know, but it's WCW for you, so there we go. The Dungeon of Doom, they were a sight to behold.
Okay, so let's quickly run through the many gimmicks of Ed Leslie.
Yes.
So, Ed Leslie, most famously known as Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Now, is he an actual real-life relation of Hulk Hogan?
No.
So they're just like good friends?
They're like,
they've been friends, then not friends, and Hogan inducted him to the Hall of Fame. So just quickly behind me, you can see the Yeti. Yeah, so there is the Yeti. So Brutus Beefcake, he was Brutus Beefcake in the WWE, and Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Now, when they brought him into WCW, they just called him Brother Brutai, or they may have attempted just to have him as Brutus Beefcake, I can't remember. But quickly, now, the idea that he's got these hedge trimmers, and he's a barber, you could see that when he turned heel on Hulk Hogan, and they suddenly said, well, no, Brutus is now the butcher, you can see, well, that's how they've got round the copyright. He's no longer the barber, now he's the butcher. And, you know, that could work. The idea of someone being a butcher, like we said about the Hitman, or something like this as a nickname. If someone's just nicknamed the Butcher, if there was a boxer or a Ultimate Fighter, a MMA fighter called the Butcher as a nickname, you'd accept that. But it all kind of went downhill from here, because after being the Butcher, he became quite possibly Zodiac next, or was there something else in between?
I think it was Butcher, because they did the initial sort of thing with Avalanche and Kevin Sullivan, they were the three faces of fear.
Yeah.
And then they sort of disbanded them, but then that turned into the whole Dungeon of Doom thing, and yeah, he was Zodiac from that point, and then he became the Booty Man after that.
The Booty Man.
Yeah, he was revealed as and actually it was all a ruse in the end, and that they'd actually, him and Hogan had patched things up, and he was actually an inside man for the Dungeon of Doom or something like that. He was Hogan's inside man.
And eventually he became the Man with No Name.
Was that WCW?
Yeah.
Was it? Okay.
Well, where did you think that was?
Well, I know he was the Man with No Face in WWF before he sort of returned with the barbershop stuff.
Hang on.
After he had his accident, he used to run out and just attack bad guys, but he would be completely masked with nothing there, and no one would ever know who he was. And he was never revealed who he was. He just came back, but it was him apparently.
Okay, so yeah, in WCW, it says the Butcher continued to wrestle for some time after the Three Faces of Fear broke up in May '95. Then he became an amnesiac as the Man with No Name. Okay, so just to run through the list of names he's had, this is the work of Ed Leslie. The gimmicks, and these are quite possibly in alphabetical order rather than date order, but his names are Baron Beefcake, Big Brother Booty, the Booty Man, Brother Brutai, Brute Force, Brutus Beefcake, the Butcher, the Clip Master, the Disciple, the Disciple of course, which was it in NWO, it wasn't so bad.
Dizzy Clip Master, that's just
okay, hang on, Dizzy Golden, Dizzy Hogan, which predates...
Yeah.
So that's where the connection to Hulk Hogan as a relative. Ed Boulder.
That was also in tag with Hogan as well, Boulder Brothers.
Eddie Golden, Eddie Hogan, the Mariner, the Man with No Face, the Man with No Name, and the Zodiac.
That's a hell of a list.
18 gimmicks. For one man.
Yeah.
Yep. He's just one man with 18 names.
Did he have a long career, or was that all just in the space of about?
He's a Hall of Famer. He was in the Hall of Fame. Finally made his Hall of Fame
Now
appearance last year.
I've got no problem with him being in the Hall of Fame, but he is someone where they said that he was in the Hall of Fame just to kind of help rehabilitate Hogan back into WWF. So obviously Hulk Hogan had his controversies, and they brought him out, I think, for the first time on television in a Saudi Arabia show where they suspected that he's not going to have a negative reaction from the audience. I think the next time they brought out Hulk Hogan on TV was to commemorate that Mean Gene Okerlund had died. And again, people in the audience aren't going to, show the disrespect to Mean Gene whilst that's happening. Yeah. And then, still within this process, even though they've brought him out again for a Saudi Arabia show and maybe one or two other times, if the Brutus the Barber Beefcake's being put into the Hall of Fame, they can have Hulk Hogan come out and induct him, and they're not going to rain on Brutus Beefcake's parade. So right. there are the conspiracy theories for why Brutus Beefcake got the nod, and it was basically just to help bring Hulk Hogan back into the picture.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. So Sam, what would you say is the worst gimmick? Let's say that's definitely, rather than like looking up gimmicks and we can see stuff from the archives, what's the gimmick that struck you as the worst thing you've ever seen whilst watching wrestling?
Well, I made a little list earlier.
Yeah.
For me, I think I would say Eugene is one that really made me feel uncomfortable whenever I watched it.
Now, I really liked Eugene at first. And at first, it worked.
It's one of these things where, especially if I was looking it up, and even the wording of it sounds a little bit weird. He was brought in. This is on Wikipedia. I don't know if this is a quote from the time, but he was brought in as the special needs nephew, I think, of Vince McMahon.
No, Eric Bischoff.
And Eric Bischoff. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
So. Even just the terminology there kind of now makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. I remember watching, and even though he had a win over Triple H at some point, which the commentary team really liked to harp on about at the time, it was one of these ones, going back to the believability factor. I never believed that someone who had as many mental difficulties as Eugene was portrayed to have could actually go in the ring with these top superstars. I know he was a tag team champion with William Regal, which I was kind of okay with because I think William Regal did a lot of the work there. But it was one of these ones where he came in and it just always felt a little bit uncomfortable, even as a kid who didn't fully understand it as I was at the time.
Yeah, it was one of these things, if memory serves, where somewhat the idea is that, Eric Bischoff's like, I've got my sister's son, he wants to come in, and William Regal then had to babysit him for a lot of it. But the idea was that he's always watched wrestling, and he's a big fan, so he'd get in the ring and he'd do a Stone Cold Stunner, or he'd, do the people's elbow and like the rock bottom, because he's just emulating what he's seen, which goes against their whole message of don't try this at home. Or as they'd say back in the day, they may have changed it now, it was like, don't try this at home, school, or anywhere. Because obviously people would say, well, it's not at home, and that's why they could pile drive their friends at school. But there was a certain point, he may have also worked with Kurt Angle and some, like you say, Triple H, but there was a certain point where the audience very vocally turned on him. And the idea, I think they tried to turn Eugene heel at some point, but it's like, you can't really turn this character heel and make it work. Either he's going to be really sympathetic babyface, or it's going to run its course, and then that's what ended up happening.
I think he's also a case of a character that just was too much for the performer as well, because I know that the guy that plays him, a guy called Nick, he's called Nick Dinsmore, and he was one of these guys that was in like the developmental and was like really. I kept seeing his name brought up a lot of time as a guy that was going to come up to the main roster and was going to be like a really big deal because he was like properly a very good in-ring guy. And people like him and Rob Conway at the time, things like that, they were like a team, and they were like a really good team apparently, and we were really hopeful for him. And then that's what he came up with for him to come up to. And unfortunately, he's obviously he's still made a career of it because but he could never escape Eugene. So he was even when he left WWE, he was still Eugene on the Independents. I've actually seen him as Eugene over here in an independent show, and he's perfect. He's still very good in there. He has adapted the character to the point where it's not as deplorable as almost as they potentially could have made him. I will say that I think that it could have been a lot worse. Considering who's running the company and what sort of humour he finds in things, I think it could have been a hell of a lot worse than that actually was. But yeah, as I say, it's a character like you say that the crowds were turning on him because he was beating people like Kurt Angle and things like that. And more hard devout fans were just like, I'm sorry, I'm not believing this character anymore. And like I say, he was his whole turning heel thing was shouting at him, sat in the crowd saying, "I am special." All this sort of stuff. And unfortunately, despite the talent of the performer, it's just a character he couldn't go anywhere with after a limited shelf life.
Yeah. Okay. So, with the idea of like a bad taste gimmick like there with Eugene, I'm going to bring up the character Oklahoma, which
I was going to bring him up. Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't know this, Sam, there was in the mid to late 90s in the WWF. There was the bookers, the writers, the creative control, which primarily was Vince Russo, who you may be familiar with the name, and a guy called Ed Ferrara. And for some almost inexplicable reason, when WWF was suddenly winning the Monday Night Wars, Vince Russo, there we go, decided to jump ship to WCW. Now, his gripe at the time, despite being on the losing team, and then, he could point to, and he still does point to, that he invented the Attitude Era and did all of this. With the introduction of Thursday Night SmackDown, as it was at the time, to go up against WCW Thursday Night Thunder, he was doing twice as much work, writing 2 shows a week, but still only getting the same pay. He decided to leave the winning team, which previously was the losing team, and he went to WCW. And within a few weeks, his secondary writer, the one who'd back him up and do the writing with him, Ed Ferrara, who you can see behind Dave here, went with him. And they came up with all kinds of new gimmicks that appeared in WCW, including the one that Ed Ferrara, who was a writer, not a performer, had for himself, which was called Oklahoma, which was a parody of Jim Ross, and in particular, the fact that Jim Ross had Bell's palsy, like having a stroke. So his face would droop, his speech was slightly affected, and he'd do this character on television. And the question is, now, there is another layer to this of what happened in history later on, years later. But how did they think this was going to go over well? This character obviously is going to be a heel. It's mocking someone in the competition who isn't a wrestler for a health condition, for basically a disability that they'd got. And it was hated. But it went on for long enough for Ed Ferrara as Oklahoma to become the WCW Cruiserweight Champion.
Wow.
And he's not a cruiserweight.
No, not at all.
So,
that is insanity. Because I know Vince Russo was the World Heavyweight Champion at one point in WCW, wasn't he?
Yeah. In one sense, I don't blame them. It's like if someone gave me the booking power of WWE right now, I'd be world champion next week. You've got to understand that to some degree. But Vince Russo was a WCW World Heavyweight Champion, but he was the Cruiserweight Champion, which I think he won from Medusa, who is a WWE Hall of Famer, Alondra Blaze.
Oh, it's one of those ones where you look at it, and even from that picture, you can see he's kind of imitating the Bell's palsy side of the face. And
it's a disgusting character. It's a character that came out from just hatred and bile towards somebody, and like you say, it was never going to go anywhere, because that's where, if a character's born from that sort of what's the word? That sort of motivation,
Malice?
then
Yeah.
it's never going to. Yeah.
Okay, but here's the thing where I say about years later there is another layer to this story, which actually has nothing to do with Ed Ferreira. But Vince McMahon later, I think whilst Jim Ross may have been off TV, did one, the Dr. Heine segment, which was mocking Jim Ross having surgery, and two, he mocked Jim Ross's Bell's palsy and his mimics his voice, Vince McMahon himself. And for years, Jim Ross had been speaking badly about, I can't believe they went so low as to do this Oklahoma character, it was so hurtful, such and such a... And then McMahon kind of did his own version of it. Literally himself.
It's one of those things where, like, there are certain things nowadays you look back and with hindsight you can see that they were, like, old gimmicks were a little bit on the nose. Like, you look back now and like a gimmick like when Billy Gunn and Chuck Palumbo were a team together would never really work today because of the way that the world has moved on since then. But even then, I can only imagine that sort of character, like the Oklahoma or Vince McMahon imitating the Bell's palsy difficulties that Jim Ross would have had, just could never have worked well. Like, it's the sort of thing where if you were to make a pros and cons list, the cons list would be completely full and the pros list would be completely empty. There is nothing nice about it at all.
Yeah. And it's like, it was just taking up TV time away from someone else. It was an incredibly bad idea.
Yeah, definitely. Both times.
I mean, there's so many bad taste gimmicks that you can go back to. I mean, we mentioned it briefly earlier, but one of the first ones I thought of when I was thinking of my little list of bad gimmicks was the Truth Commission back in 1987. That was all sort of born out of the apartheid sort of like style stuff, and it's like, really, this is it's a South African contingent, well, supposedly. So apparently Bret Hart, when he was doing a tour of South Africa, met this actor and liked him and got on with him and suggested him to be a character as a manager of some kind. So they came out with him being the commandant. So he came out, just the commandant came out and just came on his own, did this whole sort of thing against the whole anti-America thing, and obviously sort of Bret Hart being sort of involved as well, sort of helped that sort of side of things. But so he would come out and did this little speech thing, and then many months later came out with his group, the Truth Commission, all in like this South African army fatigues and all this sort of stuff, and the whole sort of vibe of it being sort of anti-American and I don't just because obviously apartheid was still sort of, I don't know if it was a thing still or if it had just finished or I'm not a massive historian on that sort of side of things, but yeah, just this whole thing of them all marching to the ring and doing the whole sort of march thing, and yeah, I don't know. It was just a very odd concept, and like just a bit of an odd addition to the gang wars sort of time of the thing. So there was a part of like the gang wars thing where like the DOA and the Nation Domination and the Los Boricuas were all sort of having their feud. So they thought, oh, we'll bring a fourth team into it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So if you remember the Truth Commission, obviously that's obviously where the Jackal sort of like came in as well, and Kurgan, the interrogator, sort of like gave it sort of thing. And yeah, that's the thing. They were also not very good either, unfortunately. None of them seemed to be that great in ring. And I think one of them ended up being Bull Buchanan. I don't know if you remember him, but he was part of it.
B Squared with John Cena.
He was B Squared. So Truth Commission I was never really very comfortable with in terms of what they sort of where they came from, as it were.
Yeah, it's a little bit before my time.
It wasn't like they were a long-lasting team. It was literally like a few months in 1997. But,
well, I personally think that WWE have overdone the gimmick of anti-America. They had the Un-Americans, the Canadian team who came in with the upside-down America flag. I remember that. It was like Test and Christian and different people like that, always coming out and hating America. Sort of one of the ones that is very strange taste is when they had, I think it was Sean Davari, who it was kind of like the Muslim versus America.
Oh, Muhammad Hassan, do you mean?
Possibly. I don't know if it's
Davari was the mouth. Yeah, Davari was the sidekick for Mohammed Hassan. Yeah, that was post 9/11.
Well, it was more specifically, it overlapped with 7/7 in the UK. The bombings on the London Underground, and on the buses, public transport and things. Where on an episode of SmackDown, the same week that they did that, Mohammed Hassan's character came out with lots of guys who were meant to look like terrorists, extremists, whatever, like with black hoods on. And I think he was feuding with the Undertaker at the time, and he was like, they were like kidnapping him, and it was like as if they were gonna kill him or execute him or something like this. And they still aired it. So like the 7/7 bombing happened, and it might either have been the same night, same day.
Same day in America. I didn't know over here, but aired in America, yeah.
Now, was it the same day that they taped it or the same day that they aired it? But
either way, they taped it like 2 days before.
Exactly.
So when they were taping it on Tuesday and broadcasting on Thursdays.
To pull the episode or to edit the episode, and they didn't. And they aired it, and it got incredibly negative feedback in America. I believe they didn't air it over here. And if it was whatever channel, I forget what channel they would have been on it with SmackDown at the time, they basically said, we're not having this character on television anymore. And there was a pay-per-view coming up maybe a week later or a week and a half later.
Yeah.
And so they literally, even though he was in the main event with The Undertaker for the world title, Undertaker was the world champion at the time, they had it so that Undertaker defeated Mohammed Hassan in the main event. I can't remember if they had sort of druids or his own guys take Mohammed Hassan away, and that was it. The character was never ever seen again.
I think they actually pretty much I remember because I'd not seen the footage, but they actually did put part of the footage in the pre-match B-roll or have you. I don't think it was the main event, because I think the match was actually to see who was going to face someone at SummerSlam. I think maybe Batista was the
okay, champion, I might be wrong.
But then, so it was, and it was all sort of middle of the so all these guys that were in those hoods and things like that also interfered in the match as well. So they all came out. Undertaker just basically beat them all down. And after the match, gave the last right powerbomb to Mohammed Hassan through the stage. So he goes out there, so completely kills off the character.
Yeah.
I think the guy who played him did actually return last year, or made a small comeback at Indies last year or year before, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just looking him up.
It's weird because the whole character was supposed to be that was challenging American opinions at the time, saying that I am American, I am actually officially American, but because of my heritage, you treat me like I'm a terrorist and all this sort of thing. And
but they did it in such a way that he was still the heel.
Yeah, so that's the way. But then they just crapped on that and said, "Okay, yeah, he is a terrorist. He's a terrorist friend."
Yeah.
So it was unfortunate. Again, it's just one of those things. It's almost like the YouTube thing of a character that could have had so much potential in the way that they went with it.
And the interesting thing as well, if I remember correctly, he's actually he's an Italian, so he's got olive skin, and he's not from that background at all. Just like they had Yokozuna, who was a Samoan, portraying a Japanese champion, and they've done this at least those 2 times, if not more times as well.
Yeah.
Yes, fantastic stuff. Should we go to some more fun bad gimmicks?
Yeah, although I just want to give one mention, just since I've still got it open here. It says this is an interesting thing, just with the recent passing of Shad Gaspard. It says in 2011-2012, Mohammed Hassan, his name's something Kapani. What's his name? Mark Kapani. Yeah, it says they wrote a graphic novel together with Shad Gaspard called Assassin and Son, and it won several awards for Best Original Independent Graphic Novel. So how about that piece of trivia for you there? Mohammed Hassan and Shad Gaspard, R.I.P., wrote a graphic novel. So that's definitely one to check out. But yeah, let's have some more fun with the bad gimmicks out there.
2 words. Bastion Booger.
Woo! Yeah.
So Sam looks completely confused.
The fact it's got Booger in the name really confuses me.
So Bastion Booger is played by a guy called Mike Shaw, who in WCW had been a guy called Norman the Lunatic.
Yeah.
Again, another guy that sort of sounds like a bit of a rubbish thing, but who's actually really popular. Quite fun, did a lot of really good work with the character. had Teddy Long sort of like managing him. There he is on the very left. There's Bastion Booger.
Silver.
So in WWF, they had shaved his head and put him in the most ill-fitting gear could possibly do, and would come to the ring eating. And his music was like farts and burps and goggles and gurgles and all this other sort of stuff.
And the idea
really,
was he
really strange
stank.
stuff. He stank and everything like that. And his debut, I remember his debut. He hadn't been built up at all. This is how old I am because I remember this episode of Superstars. His debut was against Virgil, perennial jobber Virgil, who was never hadn't been winning anything. And this is Bastion Booger's debut match, and Virgil beats him. They had a rematch the next week where Bastion Booger did the win, but it was like, okay, I'm not really holding much hope out for this guy if he's losing his debut match against Virgil. Now you got the picture of him there. Now he did actually come in with another gimmick, which made one appearance on Monday Night Raw. I wonder if you can remember this one, Dave.
I do. Friar Tuck or whatever it was. Friar
Ferguson.
Friar Ferguson.
I'm going to turn myself up, rotate myself up, and you see him in his glory. There he is. I'm going here. Friar Ferguson.
You look like you're trying to get a bit of upskirt there, Dave.
I'm trying to. So Friar Ferguson over there. He was a dancing friar. He would come out, he would get drunk with whatever liquid was in his bottle, and would dance like really bad, like gyrations and things like that. The video is on YouTube somewhere of him. Let's say it's on the network, but Friar Ferguson, the crowd that night seemed to really like him. But again, it was a character that was going to go nowhere, so he made no more appearances as his character since then. But look at his. I'm going to rotate again. Look at his hair. He cut his hair with into the monk's ring.
Wow. But yeah,
Absolutely.
It's interesting that, Sam, so again, watch the network. Just basically go through, like, some of these didn't make it to pay-per-view, but if you just watch, like, good ones to always watch is just go year by year watching the Royal Rumbles, because the Royal Rumbles are always fun. But you get, like, to see a sample of all of the gimmicks that they had that year. And so when you watch through, like, even from, like, 1988, 89, 1991, through to about 95, 96... you just get some absolutely hideous gimmicks, like the worst gimmicks in WWE history from that period. So in the late 80s, you had the Big Boss Man, who clearly he was a law officer, but he's a wrestler. And he was great. Ray Traylor, a great wrestler. And he sold the gimmick well. And, you know, his background is that he had worked in a prison or as a prison guard or something. And you'd get the Bushwhackers, and they're the Australians that do their Bushwhacker march and stuff like this. And you'd get some bad things like the Red Rooster and the Gobbledygooker, as we mentioned earlier. But there was like even the Undertaker, and you'd get Hacksaw Jim Duggan with his hoe and his 2x4, ho, and stuff like this. And then obviously, like, those wrestlers either moved on or they needed the new generation, as WWF called it themselves in the mid-90s. And they tried to still do gimmicks based on professions, like the Big Boss Man. We had the Mountie, which was a counterpart to the Big Boss Man as being a Canadian Mountie, a mounted police officer. But he was like the bad guy, whereas the good guy was the all-American Big Boss Man. And so there'd been these kind of gimmicks, but they started looking at what else can we have. And so we had a plumber, which was TL Hopper, or TL Hooper, I forget how it's pronounced. TL Hopper, I believe.
TL
Hopper, yeah. You had the dustman, Duke the Dumpster Drozy, who would come out with a garbage can. Now, wrestlers, since like the Attitude Era, would come out with garbage cans and hit each other. But his whole gimmick was that he was a garbage man. You'd get the Goon, who was a hockey player. Who was the Goon? Was that Tracy Smothers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that wasn't Tracy Smothers. We had this chat last week. Tracy Smothers was Freddie Joe Floyd.
Freddie Joe Floyd.
He had no gimmick.
No gimmick.
He was just called Freddie Joe Floyd.
Okay, it was a similar era. We had, like I said, the Goon. What were some other famously bad ones we had from that era, which were based on professions? Or we had Mantar. We need to come on to Mantar.
Mantar!
With urgency. We had Santa Claus, who was an evil Santa Claus.
Santa Claus!
You know,
let's bring Mantar up. There he is.
So there's Mantar. We also had, so here's Max Moon behind me here. Now, the interesting thing, I'll just say about Max Moon whilst I'm pointing, and then we'll come more back to Mantar. The interesting thing with Max Moon is I forget the guy who portrayed him here, but the original person to do it was Conan, who's been basically everywhere, and this was his only stint in WWF. But this isn't him. But he'd come in, and like in Conan, he's like one of the most famous Mexican wrestlers of all time. He's been a US champion, tag team champion, WCW. He's been in TNA. Still works in Impact Wrestling now. Maybe does stuff with MLW. He's literally been big everywhere except for WWF. When they brought him in as Max Moon. And the idea of it was that he was going to be like Predator from the movie Predator. So that he's going to have like this fancy costume with high-tech stuff. And he's going to do all these impressive moves, like he's some sort of ninja robot sort of thing. And then the costume looks like this. And he didn't like it, and he didn't last long. But they spent so much designing this costume, they just gave it to this guy. And I think you can see it in maybe Royal Rumble 1992, or something like this. But that's pretty much, it was done within months.
Okay.
Yeah, the guy in the outfit, yeah, they gave it to him because he was the only one who fit it. And it's a guy called Paul Diamond who had been Kato in the Orient Express.
Oh yeah, of course. Okay, so what do you want to say about Mantar, Dave?
Well, I mean, look at him. This is actually two different eras of Mantar in terms. So the guy on here. Right, so that's later Mantar, as it were. So it was sort of like almost the more credible Mantar. But he was. But the first time we saw him, first couple of appearances, he entered wearing that, and he would get in the ring with that on, and would try to gore the opponent before the match would start with that on, and scare the opponent out. But when he took it off, it was just a bloke. It's just so yeah. So then they had Jim Cornette, managed him for a little bit. And to sort of give him a little bit of credibility and all that sort of stuff. Jim Cornette had another one as a manager who had to like manage crap in the past. But yeah, I mean, like I said, just look at him.
Wow.
Believe it or not, he was in the Truth Commission for a little bit.
Wow. Okay, so the interesting thing though, you say that, but then we had El Torito later, which was basically mini Mantar. So like a mini Mantar actually becomes a Minotaur, which is the animal which it's trying to be, the mythological Minotaur. Okay, so who would you say, guys, has got the worst gimmick in wrestling today?
Today?
Yeah, or who's even in the conversation for that?
If they were still going, and the company themselves hadn't realised that the gimmick was going nowhere, I would have said the Nightmare Collective.
Possibly.
EW with Brandy Rhodes and her merry band of misfits, just was not good. Yeah. This whole sort of thing. I'm Cody Rhodes' wife. No, I'm into witchcraft and all that sort of stuff, and I'm gonna be like this spooky Papa Shango style sort of like a woman, and I'm gonna make this woman shave her head and then go bring in Awesome Kong and make her utterly redundant. And then bring in Luther, whoever that is. And then that just 1 week it was like, oh well, you know, she goes to an interview, says yeah, it wasn't very good, I didn't want to do it, and suddenly just throwing whoever wrote it under the bus a little bit, and then suddenly it was never mentioned again.
Yeah.
I felt a bit sorry for Mel because she had to shave her head for it. It was all right. Later, it's done. I was like, oh, thanks, Brandy.
Yeah.
Haven't really seen her again since then either.
No, although there's been like the lockdown, which in one sense might benefit her because they could just bring her back and kind of ignore that period.
Right.
I hope they will.
But yeah, okay, so... Sorry, Sam, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I had a brainwave of, while Dave was talking, of who I would say has probably got the worst gimmick at the moment, which is Shorty G.
Shorty G.
Oh.
Which is just appalling.
Chad.
The thing is, obviously, like as you say, like Chad Gable, essentially has got sort of a bit of a Kurt Angle style career. He went to the 2012 London Olympics, and then when he was in NXT, him and Jason Jordan were American Alpha. They became NXT Tag Team Champions. I think they were SmackDown Tag Team Champions as well when they moved up to the main roster. Then out of nowhere, Jason Jordan gets taken away as Kurt Angle's illegitimate son. Chad Gable's left on his own for a bit, and then is given Shelton Benjamin as a tag team partner, essentially trying to do American Alpha again, but it's not. And then he was given the gimmick of essentially Damien Mizdow, but with Bobby Roode. And now he's Shorty G, which I think anyone who has a reference to their size in their name, if it's small or short or anything like that, is never going to work in my eyes. And the fact that it's sort of a way of...
okay, hang on a second. We mentioned Friar Tuck earlier. What about Little John? That he seems to do all right for himself.
In fact, I don't know who he is.
What? No, I'm just talking about the character from Robin Hood. So there was Friar Tuck and Little John.
I don't think it counts in the wrestling style.
Absolutely, you're right there. No, Little John, he's gone through time.
Yeah.
Not as a wrestler, which is what Shorty G's doing.
Yeah.
I think. Well, I suppose you've got Little Spike Dudley. Is the only one. But again, he was always like the little guy, the little scrappy one. He was never really meant to be anything beyond that. I think the only reason they put Little Spike Dudley was so his initial were LSD as well. But I think Shorty G at the moment has probably got one of the worst gimmicks going.
Okay, what about so King Corbin? Does that gimmick actually work, or is it just that they're pushing through? Because he's not a failure, clearly, but I don't think anyone is particularly in favour of what everything about him is.
Yeah, well, I think the thing about him is even when he was Baron Corbin, he came in and he was really hot when he won the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. He came in as the United States champion as well. He had a feud with Austin Aries before that in NXT. But on the main roster, he's never really fully got over. He's always been a heel, but he's never really been hated as a heel. He's kind of always been hated more as just, a person, it seems to me.
Yeah, and why is that? It's interesting with WWE audiences. Like Roman Reigns, obviously, he's had somewhat of a more forgiving audience towards him, even though they've somewhat turned on him again at times, since everything with his leukemia announcement a couple of years back. But why is it, like King Corbin, he's a heel, Baron Corbin was a heel, and the audience make it very clear that it's not heat, it's go away heat, we don't like you. WWE audiences, like with John Cena for so many years, like with Roman Reigns, kind of inherited that from John Cena, and even Seth Rollins is the only one they were smart enough to look at and say, actually, the audience is turning on this guy, we better get in front of it and just turn this guy heel. And then it fixed it. Seth Rollins was fixed by turning heel. But what is it with WWE audiences where they really do give people go away heat?
I think they just know too much. That's the thing. Is with all the fact that it's like a reality era almost, with things like Total Bellas and other shows like that, where the wrestlers are also reality stars. The wrestlers just seem to know too much. They know too many things about the behind the scenes things as well. They know before a wrestler's been pushed, when they're getting pushed. It seems like that, and I think it takes out a lot of the entertainment value. The fact that it's predictable, where in the past, obviously, you didn't have the internet to the same extent that you have now. People just seem to know too much. They predict too much, and people almost search for spoilers. I think.
Yeah.
I think that ruins it.
And sometimes, depending on the era as well. I mean, obviously, go back to like a lot of this stuff we're talking about is like the more cartoony era of like the 80s and 90s. But even when the NWO came in and they were sort of like the cool heels and whatnot, they were like the more reality based as well. I mean, you had. At the same time as WCW, you still had the Dungeon of Doom. You had, you also had, I don't remember, Mortis and Wrath.
Yeah, they were
These
based on
guys that
Mortal
were brought in.
Kombat.
They were great. They were really cool looking characters, like Mortal Kombat style based sort of stuff with Mortis. It was like Chris Canyon and Wrath.
And Glacier.
And Bomb.
And Glacier.
Glacier, yeah, no, another one sort of like all these sort of like characters that will probably be quite cool characters, but had they not debuted at the time the NWO were around, you know, they were coming in at that time and they looked completely out of place. So that and they sort of, I don't know if they necessarily had like go away sort of stuff as such, but that can work against things as well. I mean, I love the timing of a lot of these characters coming out. I remember like hearing from recent podcasts that Glacier was a character that had been hyped for absolutely ages. I'm talking like 6 months before he made his debut or something like that. It just ended up being some guy that did kicks and was around the time the end of the road started up. So the timing was all off for that character and for guys like Wrath and Mortis.
Yeah. Okay, so in AEW at the moment, like there's a few gimmicks which are worth like mentioning in terms of, are they a good gimmick? Are they a bad gimmick? What do we think? So a very controversial hot topic one, but I'd say everything seems to indicate that it works, is Orange Cassidy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is this a good gimmick? Is it a bad gimmick? Is this an example of a gimmick that works, but actually, in one sense, might do more harm than it does good?
Depends on where they end up going with him, because he's a character that he is the guy that plays him. It's his character. It's not like it's a guy that a character that's come out of a writing room.
Yeah.
Because it's his character. He knows what he's been doing with it. He's been working on it for years and years and years. And what works, what doesn't, and these shows, and what gets reactions. Obviously, a lot of the audience that have seen him so far have known what the tricks of the trade are with him as well, what he does. In terms of live audience, at least, obviously, then they got to really see what he could do when he does turn up the notch, like that match against Pac at the pay-per-view a couple of pay-per-views ago.
Yeah.
So obviously, depending on where they go with it, obviously, it can only, those sort of things can only last a little while. I don't see any reason why they should change anything about him, or if they should do. But I think in terms of shelf life, it really does depend. I think they trust the guy who's performing him to sort of go with what he can see, how he sees it going.
See, therein lies the problem, I think, because even though he's made a name for himself on the indie scene, he can turn up to an indie show and go to different cities where people haven't seen him before and do the same shtick week after week, month after month, for a few years. And he might think, I've been doing this for 3 years or 5 years, and now it's finally got me to the point where I'm on TV. But he's literally had he might have been in about 3 or 4 or 5 6-man tag matches, but he's been in that casino ladder match that they just had, and he was obviously doing moves and things, and he's had that match with Pac at Revolution. But other than that, he's not had a singles match that I'm aware of, and I don't think he's won yet.
Yeah, he has on Dynamite.
Oh, has he? Okay, but like,
it was quite a surprising win, but he did win a match.
Okay, but where can it go in that? Oh, he's lazy, he's lackadaisical. Occasionally he'll try. Does it mean that when he tries and then he wins, that he's just better than everyone? Because how can he be a champion? Now, he could win. Like, I don't think he's going to be in the picture for the TNT title in a serious way anytime soon, because they need to establish the belt. And he isn't a good match to have a feud with Cody, in my opinion. But later down the line, so say he's won a few, he loses a few, is it going to be, well, eventually he's going to start trying more and his gimmick has to change? Is it going to be... See, I always like the idea that Orange Cassidy comes out and he's just lazy. When I've seen some of his indie stuff where it's literally that the glasses get knocked off and the referee then puts on the glasses, and then the referees are like very slow and stuff like that, that to me doesn't work. If it's just that he's very chilled and I can do this with my hands in my pockets because I'm so much better, and I don't care if I win or lose because I'm lazy. That could work. But how long it could just be with these slow kicks, and luckily no one's selling them as if they really hurt. But these slow, half-hearted kicks and stuff, how long can you do that before actually we feel like we've seen that now? What else?
Yeah, it's one of these things where he's almost one of these gimmicks where it's over with the fans, but it's never going to lead to, as we were talking about earlier, the competitive side of it. He's never going to be seen as someone who is, world championship contender.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think at some point it will have to change up, and I think he will have to, sort of take it more seriously. The character, that is, take the matches more seriously. But I think that they use him quite sparingly, though. Obviously, the amount of time that he's been there and he's only had 2 or 3 matches, that helps prolong the gimmick and keep it going for as long as possible. But certainly, like the antics that he does around the ring, they're still amusing. But it is a question of how long that will stay amusing for. So we'll have to just wait and see with that, I suppose.
Yeah. Like one of my favourite Orange Cassidy antics is just when someone pulled a ladder from under the ring and he's just on it. That's great, but after a while we'll come to expect that. But I think an example to this is you can look to Impact Wrestling with another indie darling wrestler that has a gimmick that definitely works. If you go to a wrestling show and it's like, I'm going to go see the wrestling, I haven't seen wrestling in ages, and I'm going to see this indie show, and there's Joey Ryan on it. So the master of the penis plaques.
Yes.
They brought him into Impact Wrestling a few months ago, and then he's doing his penis plex on Ken Shamrock and people like this. But what they've done recently, and I don't watch Impact non-stop action, total, right? But it would seem they've changed up his gimmick. They've almost given him the right to censor gimmick, where he's all about cancel culture, and now he's anti-penis gimmick and stuff like that. And to me, that's just a sign that you couldn't take his gimmick and just do it on television indefinitely. After a little while, it's like, we've seen this now, you need to do something different. And they kind of had to go the complete opposite way. And it might be that they go the complete opposite way, and then he has a change of heart, and he starts doing the dick flips and more and stuff like this. But these gimmicks, which is so not, I'm a wrestler, I'm trying to win a championship, it's, I'm in there, I want you to touch my wang, or I want to just put my hands in my pockets and not wrestle. It's like, after so long, what are they even doing there?
Yeah, well, it's the comedy characters, isn't it? It's like that typical thing of once you've done a joke, then you can't do the same joke again because everyone already knows the joke. And so with a comedy character, like with Joey Ryan with the penis plex, once you've seen one penis plex, you've seen them all, really, unless it starts becoming like a chain or something special starts happening with it. But the joke does get old quite quickly, and so I think that's why they have to keep changing and evolving. Otherwise, it goes nowhere and becomes stale quite quickly.
Yeah. Anything to add on that, Dave?
Not really, no.
Okay. So, is there anything else major that we need to cover, or shall we come on to what we think are our nominations for the worst gimmick of all time?
There's a couple of ones I think, well, I mean, as far as worst gimmicks of all time, we can come up with this. I wondered if this would be considered as a sort of like a ancient chain. Basically, it's all tag teams who are known as the new versions of the tag teams. So every new team, apart from the Age Outlaws and Day.
Yeah.
I would say. So you like the new Midnight Express, like Bombastic Bob and Bombastic Bart, or was it the other way around?
I think it was the other way around. Bodacious Bart and Bombastic Bob.
Like the new Rockers, the new Blackjacks. Those sort of anytime like a team or something is the new version of somebody, just seems to I don't know, just seems to throw a wrench into the works of those particular teams' progression, as it were. I think straight away.
Yeah.
Because you're immediately comparing it to the older team. And if they are the new version of someone, that old team must have been a massive deal back when they were. And, like, even with the new Rockers, like, obviously one of them was one of the Rockers, but it just didn't work. And
And was it the new foundation, Owen and Jim Neihart?
The Anvil.
Yeah.
The Anvil. Yeah.
The new
Well,
foundation.
that could have worked, but they were only together for a few months, so it wasn't like a very long-lasting thing. But so I didn't really mind the new foundation as much because it was a decent way to introduce Owen to the audience, I guess. But it just seems like a new team seems just really didn't seem to go with it. I had one from TNA, or it might be / Impact. I'm not sure when the change of name was. But I've got a guy. I think we all know James Storm. We all know him, don't we? So James Storm, great talent, America's Most Wanted, great team, Beer Money, great team. A couple of singles runs that were okay, but fine. But then he became the leader of his own stable called the Revolution.
Ooh,
I was looking this up earlier because I just remember this as being a particularly bad gimmick for him. So suddenly James Storm is this leader of the guys called the Revolution. Is this sort of like this inspirational cult style leader, and suddenly he's a cult guy that is kidnapping wrestlers and brainwashing them.
Wow.
So he starts off with Sanada, the guy from New Japan, which you know now as Sanada now. But then back at TNA, he was Saya Sanada, and he changed him into the Great Sanada. Basically, it was a Great Muta ripoff. And then he changed Suicide into Manic. And then brought in Abyss and became tag champions with him for a little bit. But it wasn't even like the way that just general sort of like this brainwashing thing's bad enough as it were. They also had one where he was brainwashing Mahabali Shera. And I can't remember what he changed his name to, but there was this whole sort of series of little skits on one of the shows where everything was being shown, video footage being shown from Shearer's perspective. So it was all from his viewpoint. The whole camera was from his eye point. And you had Manic and Storm sort of arguing over something and something going on, but you could sort of like, it's all been done from his shot, from his point of view. And I just looked at it and I thought, if someone's actually been received this footage and they're putting it on the program, then why is no one calling the fucking police?
Yeah.
Get this stuff here, a guy being tortured and kidnapped and trying to be brainwashed by these guys who are also under the employ of the same people. You're trying to think, I think we might want to try and find out what's going on here, and maybe there might be some legality into it. And then it also sort of ended up with this weird little bit as well involving Mickey James, where her and James Storm are at a train station, and Storm's trying to convince her to join the Revolution. She doesn't want anything to do with it. And so they're just walking along the platform, saying, okay, no hard feelings, we're still friends, all that sort of stuff. And then Storm just knocks her off the rail side. She falls into the rail line, and presumably gets run over by a train.
Oh
we don't know if that's actually, I think that might have been a bit of a thing. I think it was just like, oh no, there was no train there, but she did get concussed or something like that. And that sort of led on to her leaving Impact or what have you. But it was just this random thing of this guy that had been this jovial cowboy for all these years, suddenly just deciding, I'm going to become a cult leader.
Yeah.
It's a strange time.
Wow.
There's probably loads of bad TNA gimmicks that aren't coming to my mind, but...
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah,
so there was... Okay, I'm trying to remember. In TNA, on the very first or second show, there was like a ginormous guy who was called Cheeks. You also get those guys. Who are they? The Johnsons?
The Johnsons.
Yeah, and they were meant to be giant penises.
Wrestling penises.
Wrestling penises. See, but then if they can make a comeback with Joey Ryan, because Joey Ryan had his version of the Undertaker's druids, known as the Fluids.
So the Johnsons, they were known as they were also called the Shane Twins on the Independents. They were the Johnsons.
That's right.
But they did appear in WWE as these guys, the Gemini.
The Gemini.
They were Simon Dean's team. Simon Dean, the fitness guru, and who was Nova back in the day. From BWO. And so the Gemini became. They were on a hot streak for a little while. One of them got injured, and then they got released a few months later. And apparently, they are one of the more expensive releases or something like that in terms of toy making, because apparently they had their figures made and were all ready to go on the shops, and just hit the shelves just as these guys got released and were never on television again.
Wow. Yeah. So who was the team that came in around the same time as the Gemini that like had got bow ties on?
The Dicks.
The Dicks. That's
Yeah, they were on mine, and a friend of mine put them on their list as well.
And what were their names? Like Chad, Dick, and...
I know they were called Chad and Tank Toland at some point before they became the Dicks. But they became the Dicks. They came out just general sort of like this badass team that beat down Animal and Heidenreich for a little bit. But then the next week they debuted as these Chippendales. It was like, hang on, they weren't that last week. Why have they changed now?
Yeah.
Coming out and they had the baby oil and all that.
WWE don't seem to mind because like you can get a tag team, they can just suddenly be known as something like the Viking Experience, so they'll change things in the middle. But okay, so we've had the Dicks, we've had the Johnsons, the Ding Dongs, obviously you mentioned.
Ding Dongs.
Now there's the wrestler Bill DeMott, who used to be a trainer for WWE, but before that in WCW he was called Hugh Morris, and it was a joke. He was like a laughing character. Humorous. And they decided when Vince Russo came into WCW that they'd have like a tag team faction gimmick, the Misfits in Action, and they I'm trying to remember all of who's in it, but Humorous had another play on his name which became Hugh G. Rection. Hugh G. Rection. So his name went from being humorous to Hugh G. Rection.
Not even subtle.
It's not even subtle.
No one else in that thing had any like pun names. They were just like Lieutenant Loco or Captain
Corporal Cajun or
Corporal Cajun. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Who else was in that?
Well, Lieutenant Loco was Chavo Guerrero.
You didn't G.I. Bro, but that was a previous gimmick. So Booker T.
He did appear with them at one point though, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Wall was Sergeant AWOL.
Yeah. Oh my God. Terrible gimmicks. But there's so many bad gimmicks that we've not even touched on. I did bring up so the Boogeyman, which you could arguably say works to a degree.
He's still making money off it to this day.
Yeah, Mike Awesome, who this is an amazing story. There was a wrestler called Mike Awesome who you may have seen in ECW One Night Stand when they did the ECW reunion show, but he was the ECW World Heavyweight Champion. And in about the year 2000, ECW was still going on. And he actually jumped ship to WCW whilst he was still ECW World Heavyweight Champion. And the way ECW got round it is Mike Awesome went, had to come and drop the title back on ECW. And I think he dropped it to Tommy Dreamer, who then
dropped it to Taz.
Are you sure?
Who was under WWF employ.
Okay, so that's how they did it. It was that way round. So I thought they swapped it the other way around. So you are right though. So he dropped it to Taz, who was a current WWF wrestler, who then a week later dropped it to Tommy Dreamer. But then didn't Tommy Dreamer lose it almost instantly? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, he lost it the next
to
match.
Just Incredible.
Just Incredible.
Okay, yes, that's where I was remembering. So imagine like WCW got this amazing coup. They've actually, never mind that they got Medusa Alundra Blaze as the current WWF Women's Champion and she throws the belt in the bin or something like this. They actually got the current ECW World Champion, the person that Paul Heyman was putting these companies back on, and they bring him in, and he's this huge get, and within 6 months or less, he became known as the Fat Chick Thriller. His gimmick was that he liked big girls, and he was like that. He was also that 70s guy.
And became that 70s guy.
Yeah, the Fat Chick Thriller, that 70s guy, Mike Awesome.
That 70s show happened to be on at the time. They thought, we'll take something off of that show. Oh. Yeah. Do you remember Kizani?
Vaguely, I remember the name. Can't remember anything about him.
The guy came in for a little bit. Was hyped for months. And he was like, he was a carny, sort of like fairground carny character, and everything was Kizani, and I will I will kazam to the World Wrestling Federation or whatever, doing the whole sort of carny language sort of thing. And literally made, I think, like 2-3 appearances on TV. I had a very bad match with MVP in his debut, and then was eliminated early in a battle royal. That was it for him. But yeah, Kazani was very bad.
Okay, so let's think. Are there any other honourable mentions that we need to bring up, and then let's just say who we think should be the.
Oh yeah, I've got the Spirit Squad.
Oh my God, yes.
Cheerleaders. Unbelievably, one of those is a stalwart in the WWE with 2 World Heavyweight Championship reigns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stardust. Another one of mine.
Stardust.
Yeah. See, that's an example of he never seemed like he did like a weird wacky voice with it and stuff like that. And it felt like it could have been closer to Goldust. He tried to make it his own thing, and he just wasn't Goldust.
Yeah. Going back to Billy Gunn and Chuck Palumbo, they brought in Rico as their stylist manager.
Oh my God.
I liked Rico. I thought he did it so well on that.
I despised him. There was one match, I can't remember who was in it, but it was a women's match. He was one of the women's managers. He got involved in the match and got in the ring. The other woman then ripped his trousers off to reveal he was wearing a bright blue thong.
What's that? You say that he had his trousers ripped off and he had underpants with Tully Blanchard on it? A wrestling company would never do that nowadays.
I think those are what you said about the Boogeyman, and we kind of briefly mentioned that Tons of Funk was the last team on my list that I found was a bit of a disastrous gimmick.
There's a very quick mention as well. A couple of ones I got from friends of mine earlier. So, the fake versions of characters. So, like fake Razor Ramon and fake Diesel.
Yeah.
You had the fake Sin Cara came in, and Sin Cara versus Sin Cara.
I liked the fake Sin Cara was more talented than Sin Cara, and he ended up becoming Sin Cara. That though, do you know the story of that?
My favourite double one of all time. We mentioned him earlier, and we won't do a whole episode on him at some point. But when the fake Kane came along, May 19 came in and was revealed was fake Kane. The guy came out with the mask and the full body suit and the fluffiest hair ever.
Yeah.
Wasn't that Luke Gallows?
Yeah, that was Luke Gallows.
Reminds me, another one I forgot to write down was Festus.
Yeah, another Luke Gallows gimmick.
Yeah.
Wow.
Another way sort of almost made it work, but it was so bizarre. A friend of mine, Nick, also wanted us to put in Suicide from TNA. Because that was essentially it was a way of getting guys that had storyline been fired or had to leave for whatever reason into a mask and play the characters.
Okay,
like
so there's
Daniels and such.
There's a couple of points here on that you've raised that I just want to dip into. First of all, Sin Cara. The interesting, fascinating story there, which they actually did acknowledge in WWE, is that there were 2 Sin Caras, Sin Cara Azul and Sin Cara what? Negro, yes, right. So, they were both previously in not Japan, in Mexico, where they both had the gimmick name Mystico, and Sin Cara, like the WWF Sin Cara, was the more famous Mystico, but the other one was Mystico first. And so the one that then became famous made it so that the original Mystico couldn't be Mystico anymore for some reason. So then when he went to WWE, and they were like, okay, your new gimmick, we're going to call you Sin Cara rather than Mystico. They then brought in the original Mystico and say, I'm now becoming Sin Cara because you stole Mystico from me. And so clearly, Mystico, whereas Sin Cara was an absolute botch machine, Sin Cara Negro was better. And then the original Sin Cara got fired, and then they just brought back the fake Sin Cara to become Sin Cara. So the ironic thing there is that Sin Cara, so this guy, Mystico, started off wrestling as Mystico. A guy stole his gimmick and became new Mystico, more famous Mystico. More famous Mystico became Sin Cara, and then original Mystico took the gimmick and ended up as the long-standing Sin Cara, who then left WWE again, ended up in AAA or whatever, called himself Sin Cara, and then WWE said, you're not allowed to be called Sin Cara. So, who knows where, I can't remember what he's known as now.
And in between all that, he was Unico.
Unico, yeah, Unico. Okay, who was the other person you just mentioned? Because there was something. Oh, Suicide.
Suicide. So yeah, it was the whole thing was that the character was born out of the video games.
That's it.
This
That's
whole
what I was going to say.
video game. Then suddenly this character was like, "Oh no, I am real. I'm here." Ha ha ha.
Yeah, but how about that? A
It's
wrestling
ridiculous.
character that debuted in a video game. That's absolutely insane. And it was just like the masked generic character. And as you said, it was crazy that they got a talented guy to play him, which was the fallen angel Christopher Daniels.
Yep.
And who was always good. He could have been a much bigger star than he's ended up becoming. Not that he's not a big star. But
So the fun little thing about that though in his debut, I think originally it was Kazarian, Frankie Kazarian was going to be playing him.
Okay.
He'd been storyline fired, I think, or something like that for some reason. So this is his way of coming back. So he does the whole sort of debut thing. His first appearance going down the zip wire and all that sort of thing. First problem was he gets down the zip wire and gets locked into the ropes or something like that, injures himself. Immediately gets injury. Then during the little
so you're
rally,
saying he did a Shawn Michaels, Owen Hart style?
he did a zip line into the through
Wow.
the impact. In the impact zone, here comes Suicide into the thing, but something went wrong. He got injured on the entrance, and then he tried to do the move from the video game. The video game had this weird finisher for him, which was like a tilt the world up, down, spiral around into like a sunset flip powerbomb sort of thing. And they said, right, go do that. All he could do was like do a running version of it into the thing, and it looked horrible. And then Tanay, being the shill of all shills, was like, "Oh, I recognise that from the Impact video game."
Yeah.
I think it was nothing like it, mate. So bizarre. But I think I'll bring us onto our ultimate list, I guess.
Okay, but do you know what? I think I need to give special mention without putting it on the ultimate list, because this, in one sense, without this being what I'm saying is what I'd say is my actual worst gimmick of all time, it's worst gimmick for a specific reason: the blue blazer. Now, if there wasn't the gimmick of the blue blazer, now you just brought this up by mentioning that Suicide had a zipline entrance, which they should never repeat. I know that they did do it in TNA with Sting, and WCW did it with Sting after the death of Owen Hart. But if Owen Hart had not been the blue blazer, he would not have been making that Sting-like entrance. So this gimmick literally played a part into this guy's death, which is... and also, you get a wrestler like Owen Hart. Why are you putting him, even if he'd done it earlier in his career when he's a greenhorn, but still from the Hart family, of which there's like 14 wrestlers or something, why would you get this guy and ever put him in a dopey mask, like with feathers and a cape? You don't ever need to call him like a superhero. It was always a bad gimmick. They brought Owen Hart, who'd already main evented pay-per-views and was this big Canadian star. They put him back in a gimmick, and literally, because of this gimmick, it inspired something which cost him his life. I've said my bit there.
No disagreement here.
Yeah. Okay, so let's perhaps something a little less dark than that. What do we think are the nominations for the worst gimmick of all time? Sam?
I would have to say the Gobbledygooker goes firmly up in a top 5 list. Not one that I know a lot about, but having seen a little bit of it on TV earlier, I was just appalled by it. I would say Eugene, for me, would go up there as well, for sort of the taste reasons. And I think for me, just because it's so disappointing, I'd put Stardust in my top 3. Just because, obviously, we've seen how great Cody Rhodes was before all of the Stardust stuff. He didn't really need to go into this gimmick where he was trying to be just like his brother. And now, obviously, he's in AEW and he's running the company, and he's a phenomenal star there. So I think Stardust is really disappointing for me as a younger generation fan.
Yeah. Dave, who would you nominate?
I think as far as 3s go, I think Gobbledygooker again, put him in there. Just because I really just despise the whole storyline, I'm actually going to go with James Storm in the Revolution. I think that whole thing there, as it's a bad idea. But I'm going to give my number 1 though to a guy I'm surprised we've not mentioned yet, and a guy we saw his debut last week in our watch along.
Yeah.
Oz.
Wow.
I say Oz as the word. Just look at it.
It is terrible.
It's working in, coming in as the Wizard of Oz, but not the Wizard of Oz. This is the real Oz. We're going to show you what Oz can really do, what Oz really is all about. Which is just basically because we own the rights to the Wizard of Oz. And giving Kevin Nash this ridiculous hat, mask, and a wizard guy in front of him going, "Welcome to Oz." It's just no, worst gimmick of all time is Oz, in my opinion.
Okay, I think I'm going to give my nominations to. So my ultimate nomination, I'll say first, is Randy Orton. Just terrible. No, I'm joking. Just the worst thing. It's just the guy. No, I'm joking. I like Randy Orton. But on that same thought, one that hasn't been mentioned, and I'm going to mention this as something for the reason that it just goes to show you how something could go the wrong way, and that is Dave Bautista as Deacon Batista, coming out with Devon Dudley. Now, Batista, I always enjoy Batista. I really like Batista as the person when you see him in interviews and stuff, and as an actor and stuff like this. You know, I liked his matches, but they were never like my number one matches to watch. You know, I think he was like fun to watch, good to watch, but it's not like, oh, this is going to be like a Daniel Bryan match watching Batista wrestle. But when you see that, okay, he can be a multi-time world champion. I think is he going into the Hall of Fame this year and they just haven't done it yet? Is that the idea? I think they announced that and it's just...
Did they announce that?
Yeah, Batista's going into the Hall of Fame this year. Was the idea at least anyway. So, destined to be Hall of Famer. And you could just see with Deacon Batista, this huge guy coming out as the sidekick to Devon Dudley in a now preacher gimmick, which he should have never had. Taking collections of like money from the audience. It's like you could see, if you know like the movie Sliding Doors, how very close Batista was to just being on the wrong side of things, where he would have just disappeared into oblivion. And when you then consider like other guys like I mentioned about earlier, like the big guys like Matt Morgan or Nathan Jones, or some of these guys where it's like, well, why didn't that guy like Mark Jindrak? Loads of wrestlers that just sort of disappeared into nothing. It's like they so easily perhaps could have been something more, like how Batista ended up as nothing. And we saw that, well, actually, with perhaps the good luck, he became something much more, because it wasn't a guarantee. And on that similar thought, the other one, based on this same logic that I'm giving it to, is Kane. In his dual gimmicks of the fake Diesel, as we mentioned earlier, and Isaac Yankem DDS. Because, again, if you see that someone can be that good and that prominent and that successful, but they were given a gimmick which was so utterly destined to fail, and, you know, I think there is like a lesson that the wrestling world needs to learn, is that if you get a gimmick which looks like it's probably a bad idea, and it's like, well, does this seem like this person could ever be in the main event of WrestleMania? Does this person ever seem like they could be a world tag team champion? Look at that. What is this, you know, bragging with Dave?
Sorry, I said I didn't mean to bring that up, yeah.
No, I want to know that story in a second. But if there's someone that could go on to something so good, and there's so many wrestlers that have definitely missed it. Wrestlers that were like, they were really good. Like, I vaguely remember that Kazani may have been actually quite good in the ring. But there were people that definitely could have been more. Even someone like Brian Kendrick. Or Dolph Ziggler or John Morrison, who haven't reached their potential. And it's like, those examples, they've got like good careers and good stuff to it. But it's like, with the right gimmick, someone could go on to be Shawn Michaels, or they could go on to be The Undertaker. But with the bad gimmick, you could get someone who went on to be Kane, and they could have just ended up as Isaac Yankem. Or you could get someone like Dave Batista, who could have just ended up as Deacon Batista. And so the moral of my story is, if something's probably smells and looks and sounds like a bad gimmick to begin with, it probably is a bad gimmick. Don't do it. Okay, now what's your story about Hacksaw?
Oh, nothing. You mentioned Hacksaw earlier. I'm just waiting to bring up a picture of Hacksaw with a certain somebody you might recognise.
Oh my gosh! When was that?
That was taken at Southside Wrestling in 2000. 15 or 16, I want to say.
Okay,
15
so
maybe.
like Dave, like it feels like we're old friends now, but like obviously we've only known each other a few months, and like we've met far more virtually than in real life. But yeah, it's a shock to see you with the whole goatee stuff going on.
It's a lot thinner, but there we are.
And it would appear, just based on the shoulder part, that Dave actually only owns one T-shirt.
Yeah.
It's not quite the same.
Not quite the same. Speaking of, just looking at your shirt there, you've got my shirt on.
Yeah, I know. I think that as soon as I said
David's got the same shirt but with the sleeves cut off.
Yeah, we're all wearing red today. How about that?
You mentioned him earlier.
We're synchronised.
On Friday, we wear red.
Well, I will say also that in response to what you just were saying there, David, about having the gimmicks and if it smells like a bad gimmick, probably is one. I remember, obviously, it also entirely depends on the performer as well. You think about a guy like Dolph Ziggler, who was in the Spirit Squad. I didn't dislike the Spirit Squad as much as other people did. I thought it was quite a fun gimmick, but who's in the Spirit Squad was going to go nowhere, and he comes back in his big return thing. He's going to be called Dolph Ziggler. The name Dolph Ziggler on paper is ridiculous, but fair play to him. He made it work. He got given the idea of the gimmick. The first gimmick of him was putting his hand out and saying, "Hi, I'm Dolph Ziggler." That was literally his character. He just introduced himself.
Wow.
Lost his debut match against Batista, but then carried on. But we know him today, whether we hate him or love him or not.
And the thing as well is his real name, as he was Nicky in the Spirit Squad, Nick Nemeth. Like Nemeth, that's a bit of an unusual name, but Nick versus Dolph. What is Dolph? The only Dolph I'd ever heard of is Dolph Lundgren or Dolph in The Simpsons. But Dolphin, yeah, I like it. But yeah, so bad gimmicks. There's lots of examples of people that have gone on to do a lot better. People again like Cody Rhodes was, you're just going to be Stardust, and he didn't want to be Stardust. And someone we haven't mentioned, just worth mentioning this because it was quite similar. Cody Rhodes wanted to be Cody Rhodes to honour the American Dream Dusty Rhodes after his dad died. And a similar thing that they wouldn't let him do it, but a similar thing where they didn't go that route had happened in the past, that when Eddie Guerrero died, at the time of his death, Chavo Guerrero Jr. was known as Kerwin White, where he was trying to renounce his Latino heritage and just be like a white man. And so literally, if you watch the Raw is Eddie show after Eddie Guerrero died, and they're all standing out there, Chavo Guerrero, he wrestles as Chavo Guerrero, and they instantly dropped and never mentioned again Kerwin White. But he's with his bleach blonde hair, trying to be a white guy because obviously he couldn't dye his hair, in that day in light of the tragedy or stuff. But if something's bad, if something sounds bad, if it looks bad, if the name is stupid, then why take it?
Yeah, exactly. But I guess my point was that with Ziggler, it's like an interesting case of they at least gave him the chance to sort of make something of himself in that character. Whereas guys like Kazani and things like that, it's just gone. You get given a certain amount of time, and boom.
Yeah.
They can just give up on people like that. But hey, there's plenty of bad gimmicks in the history of wrestling, and there'll be still plenty more to come.
Can't wait. Okay, so let's wrap this up. Sam, where can we find you? I think you've got something special to debut.
I have, yes. I've got a new background to show you today.
Whoop, whoop.
It says all the same stuff. This is the thing. Oh, you've lost me now. That's annoying.
I was looking at you streaming. Perfectly.
There's no point me even pointing at it either. You can find me... What the hell?
You turn into Black Rain.
This is my gimmick now. It's gone. Okay. Find me on Facebook, Sam
This
George.
is the Shockmaster entrance of stream
Wrap-ups.
You can find me on... Why am I pointing still? You can find me on Facebook, Sam George Performer. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Samuel O. George.
Oh, George.
What a disaster that was.
Okay, Dave, Sam, do you have anything else to plug? You have been plugging something else recently.
Oh yeah.
Oh yes. If you check out my my social medias, I don't know. I'm still pointing. I don't know. It's become a force of habit now because I've had that so long. If you check on my social media pages, you'll see that I am currently working on being in A Midsummer Night's Dream as Francis Flute, which is due to go out on the 21st of June via live stream. So if you have a look at that, you'll see some of the updates for that.
Okay, fantastic. And Dave, where can we find you?
Find me on Twitter. It's working now. There you go. You can find me at Twitter, at Degrino, on Facebook, David Anthony Green, on Instagram, David Anthony Green Actor, but I never really use Instagram very often. And also on Twitter at D_Anthony_Green. And there we are.
Okay, and my name is David Postansky. You can find me at David Postansky, Pustansky, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. This is the Superkick Mania Pro Wrestling Podcast, which has its own Twitter, which is at Superkick Mania on Twitter, and it's part of the Extreme Improv Podcast Network. You can get all of the podcasts on iTunes and Google Podcasts and Spreaker and Alexa and all of these other things. My Alexa's about to set off, but check us out there. We also have the Extreme Improv XStreamed shows every Wednesday and Thursday, often on a Friday, usually at 8:30 p.m. at night. Fridays are the matinees. There's so much good stuff that we do. Check it all out. Lots of other podcasts. But we're gonna end this with a super kick. Are we gonna end it? Are we gonna?
Back next week with
okay.
something.
I'm feeling some sweet chin music, and here we go. Right. So I always have to then press this to end it. But
Yeah, doing my Joe Wicks. Oh. No, I didn't know.
Mine again?
Not mine, my stuff.
Yeah, David's missing, so mine. I feel like I have an idea.